Mao Zedong, born in the early years of the 20th century, was a figure whose influence would extend far beyond the boundaries of his native China. His life unfolded during one of the most turbulent periods in Chinese history, a time marked by revolution, civil war, and profound social change. Born in the small village of Shaoshan in Hunan province, Mao grew up against a backdrop of imperial decline and the search for a new national identity. The country was divided, caught between old traditions and the winds of modernity. As a young man, Mao found himself swept up in the currents of a nation yearning for transformation. His journey would lead him to become the founding father of the People's Republic of China, shaping the course of a vast and ancient civilization. Yet, in the quiet reflection of his later years, Mao's legacy would be marked by a complex mixture of admiration and controversy. As you listen to the unfolding story of Mao Zedong's life, let the calm flow of his history guide you into a restful state. Feel the steady rhythm of time as it moves from his early days to the years of his leadership and beyond. Let the events of history drift past you, gentle and unhurried. If you find yourself enjoying the journey through history, consider subscribing, sharing where you're listening from, and liking the video, though these thoughts, like the story, will fade softly into the background. Now we begin with the story of Mao Zedong's early life, where the foundations of his path would first take shape. Mao Zedong was born on December 26, 1893, in the rural village of Shaoshan in Hunan province, China. His birth came at a time when China was under the rule of the Qing dynasty, but the empire was in decline, beset by internal corruption, external invasions, and societal unrest. This backdrop of instability would be the context in which Mao's early life unfolded. Mao's father, Mao Yichang, was a prosperous farmer, while his mother, Wen Qimei, came from a humble background. Mao's family was relatively well off compared to many others in the region, which allowed him to receive an education, something that was a privilege for many children in China at the time. His early life was marked by a blend of traditional Chinese values and the changing tides of modern thought. Mao's father, a stern and demanding figure, instilled in him a sense of discipline and ambition. Despite their wealth, the Mao family was not free from hardship. Mao's father often struggled with the demands of farming life, and was known for his harsh treatment of Mao and his siblings. This tension at home would have a lasting impact on Mao's character, helping to shape his later views on authority, class, and revolution. As a young boy, Mao attended the local village school, where he learned the basics of Confucian texts. However, his education was far from traditional. Mao was deeply influenced by the New Culture movement, which sought to modernize China and challenge the centuries-old feudal system. The movement advocated for a break from Confucian traditions and embraced Western ideas, including democracy and science. These new ideas would later play a significant role in shaping Mao's thoughts and his vision for China's future. In his early teens, Mao became increasingly restless. The rigid structure of his rural life did not satisfy him. His father's constant demands and the constraints of village life seemed to stifle Mao's growing ambition. At the age of 13, Mao left his home in search of greater intellectual and political awakening. He travelled to Changsha, the capital city of Hunan, where he attended the first provincial normal school. This was a formative time for Mao. In the bustling city of Changsha, Mao encountered new ideas and people who would influence him greatly. At school, he was exposed to more progressive thinkers and revolutionary ideals. The influence of the May 4th movement in 1919, which called for a cultural and intellectual awakening, would shape Mao's views during his time at the normal school. Here, he discovered the works of Marx and Lenin, ideas that would ultimately drive him to become one of the most revolutionary leaders of the 20th century. But it was not just education that influenced Mao's early life. The political climate in China during these years was one of chaos and change. The Qing dynasty was on the brink of collapse, and the 1911 revolution, which would eventually lead to the establishment of the Republic of China, was brewing. Mao, still a young man, became increasingly aware of the vast inequities within Chinese society. Rural peasants, like his own family, lived in poverty while the imperial government and urban elites flourished. Mao's time in Changsha also coincided with the rise of radical nationalism and revolutionary sentiment. China was experiencing a moment of self-reflection, and intellectuals were debating how the country could modernize and reclaim its dignity in the face of Western imperialism and internal strife. Mao began to see the revolution as the only way forward for China, a way to address the deep-rooted social and economic inequalities that plagued the country. After finishing his education in Changsha, Mao moved to Beijing in 1918 to further his studies and immerse himself in the intellectual currents of the time. In Beijing, Mao became involved in various left-wing organizations, including the New People's Study Society. His interest in Marxism grew, as did his belief that China needed a radical transformation, one that would require a complete overthrow of the existing order. This was the period when Mao's ideas began to crystallize. While many intellectuals and students were drawn to Western ideals of democracy and capitalism, Mao found inspiration in Marxism-Leninism. He came to believe that the Chinese peasantry, which made up the majority of the population, could be the driving force behind a socialist revolution, rather than the urban proletariat, which had been the focus of Marx's theories in the West. Despite his growing revolutionary fervour, Mao's early years were also marked by personal struggles. He was not immune to the hardships of the time. In 1920, his first marriage ended in separation, and he was left to care for his young son. This experience would shape Mao's views on personal relationships and his future approach to leadership. Mao's early life was also shaped by the social and political upheaval of the time. The fall of the Qing dynasty, the establishment of the Republic of China, and the ongoing conflict between warlords and political factions created an environment of constant uncertainty. As he moved from one intellectual hub to another, Mao began to see that change in China would not come easily. Revolution would be necessary, and this would be the driving force that pushed him toward his future endeavors. The foundation for Mao's rise to prominence was being laid during these years of intellectual discovery, personal hardship, and political turmoil. The young Mao, full of ambition and dissatisfaction with the status quo, was beginning to find his place within the turbulent world of early 20th century China. Little did anyone know that the same man, once a young student searching for his purpose, would go on to shape the future of an entire nation. Mao Zedong's childhood years were shaped by the rural, agrarian backdrop of Hunan province. The family home in Shaoshan, surrounded by the lush hills and rivers of central China, was a place where Mao developed his initial sense of the world around him. Shaoshan was a small village, isolated from the urban centers of China, yet it was a place full of history and local traditions that Mao would come to reflect upon in later years. Mao's father, Mao Yichang, had initially been a poor farmer, but had worked his way to a position of relative prosperity, allowing his family to live more comfortably than many others in the region. Despite this, the relationship between Mao and his father was strained. Mao Yichang was a strict, demanding man, often harsh with his children. He expected discipline and respect, and this created a tension that would influence Mao's views on authority and class. His father's authoritarian demeanor and heavy-handedness led Mao to rebel against traditional systems of control. From an early age, Mao developed a profound dissatisfaction with the existing structures of power, whether in his own family or in the larger society. This feeling of rebellion took root during Mao's formative years. While his father encouraged him to study the classics of Confucian thought, Mao was increasingly drawn to ideas that questioned traditional authority and emphasized change. At school, Mao was introduced to a world of new ideas, and this sparked an early interest in reform. Although the education he received in the rural countryside was basic, it was through his self-guided study that he began to explore more radical notions of social and political change. Mao's exposure to new ideas continued when he left Shaoshan at the age of 13 to attend the local school in Changsha, the capital city of Hunan. Changsha, a bustling urban centre, was a stark contrast to the quiet countryside of Shaoshan. Here, Mao encountered a broader spectrum of intellectual currents and social movements that would further shape his worldview. His years at the school were marked by a burgeoning sense of curiosity about the world beyond his immediate surroundings. During this period, China was undergoing a profound transformation. The Qing dynasty had collapsed in 1911, giving rise to the Republic of China. However, the new republic was fraught with instability, and warlords ruled over much of the country, further dividing China into competing factions. The social and political chaos of the time left an indelible mark on Mao, shaping his perception of China as a nation in crisis. It was clear to him that the country's traditional systems of governance and society were failing, and he began to contemplate how China could emerge from this turmoil. Mao's intellectual journey continued during his time in Changsha, where he delved deeper into the ideas of the new culture movement. This intellectual movement, which arose in response to China's perceived backwardness, called for a rejection of traditional Confucian values and the adoption of Western ideals of democracy, science, and progress. The movement, which gained momentum during the early 20th century, greatly influenced young intellectuals like Mao. Through his studies, Mao came to see China's future as one that needed to be built upon new ideas. Ideas that would challenge the old Confucian order and create a new path for the nation. However, Mao's political awakening was not solely based on intellectual ideas. His experience growing up in a rural farming family also gave him a first-hand understanding of the difficulties facing the majority of China's population, the peasants. Mao's family, despite their relative wealth compared to others in Shaoshan, still lived in a rural subsistence economy. He saw the hardships of farming life, the struggles of peasants trying to make ends meet in a society where the elite controlled the land and resources. This exposure to the inequities of rural life would later shape his revolutionary ideology. It was in Changsha that Mao first encountered the writings of Marx, Lenin, and other socialist thinkers. He was drawn to Marxism's critique of social class, and its promise of a revolution that would empower the oppressed, particularly the working and peasant classes. Mao began to see the potential for the peasants to lead a revolution in China, something that Marxism had not fully articulated for the Chinese context. Unlike the urban proletariat, which had been the focus of Marxist theory in Europe, Mao saw the Chinese peasantry as the true revolutionary force. His time in Changsha was also marked by the influence of the May 4th movement, a nationalistic and anti-imperialist movement that gained traction after the end of World War I. The movement's intellectual leaders sought to modernize China by rejecting traditional customs and embracing new progressive ideas. The movement also championed the importance of national sovereignty, especially in the face of foreign imperialism. Mao found himself aligned with the ideas of the May 4th movement, particularly its call for a stronger, unified China. The transition from the rural world of Shaoshan to the more cosmopolitan world of Changsha exposed Mao to a broad array of ideas, philosophies, and political movements. These formative years helped shape his sense of purpose and mission. He began to understand the complexities of Chinese society and saw the deep divides between the urban elite and the rural poor. This understanding would later influence his leadership as he sought to rally the Chinese masses, particularly the peasantry, against the powers that ruled the country. Mao's years in Changsha were not without personal struggles. Despite his growing intellectual engagement, Mao's life was still marked by personal hardships. His first marriage, to a woman named Luo Yisiu, ended in separation, and he was left to care for their son. This early experience of personal hardship contributed to Mao's determination to create a new society where individual struggles would not be the defining feature of life. The vision of a society where the people's collective power could overcome individual suffering would become a cornerstone of Mao's revolutionary ideology. During these years, Mao also began to see the limits of traditional education. Though he valued intellectual pursuits, Mao became increasingly convinced that change would not come simply through books or theories. He believed that true change could only be achieved through direct action and revolution. His growing sense of activism and political engagement would soon lead him to take part in the early stages of China's revolutionary movement. By the time Mao left Changsha and moved to Beijing in 1918, his intellectual journey had brought him to a new understanding of China's problems and a clearer sense of the revolution he wanted to help lead. In Beijing, he would further explore Marxist ideology and meet like-minded individuals who would become central to his future revolutionary efforts. This was the foundation of Mao Zedong's political awakening. The combination of intellectual curiosity, personal hardship, and exposure to revolutionary ideas. The next phase of Mao's life would see him increasingly drawn to radical political action, setting the stage for the larger political movements that would define his legacy. In 1918, at the age of 25, Mao Zedong left Changsha for Beijing, seeking to immerse himself in the intellectual and political currents that were sweeping through China at the time. The young Mao had already been exposed to Marxism, the ideas of the May 4th movement, and the notion of revolution. Beijing, with its bustling intellectual scene, would be the ideal place for him to refine his understanding of the world and solidify his vision for China's future. Mao arrived in Beijing during a period of great national upheaval. The fall of the Qing dynasty in 1911 had led to the establishment of the Republic of China, but the Republic was fraught with instability. The country was divided by competing warlords, and the influence of foreign powers, particularly Japan and the Western nations, loomed large over China's political and economic landscape. The May 4th movement had ignited a wave of intellectual and political reform, advocating for a more modern and nationalistic China. In this atmosphere, Mao's understanding of China's struggle began to deepen. Beijing was a city of intellectual ferment. It was here that Mao met some of the most prominent thinkers of the time, and it was in Beijing that he further explored Marxist thought. Mao had already been exposed to Marxist ideas while in Changsha, but in Beijing he was able to engage with them more fully, developing a sense of how they could be applied to China's unique circumstances. While many of his contemporaries were drawn to Western notions of democracy, capitalism, and liberalism, Mao found himself increasingly attracted to Marxism and Leninism, which seemed to offer a clearer path towards social and political change. Mao's time in Beijing was marked by both intellectual exploration and political involvement. In 1920, he joined the Chinese Communist Party (CCP), an organization that had been formed just a year earlier with the goal of establishing a communist society in China. The CCP was still a small and nascent organization, but its message resonated with Mao, particularly its focus on the working class and the need for a radical transformation of society. Mao, however, saw a different path than many of the party's leaders, who focused primarily on urban workers. Mao's belief was that the rural peasants, who made up the vast majority of China's population, would be the key to any successful revolution in China. Mao's political ideas began to crystallize during these years in Beijing. He became convinced that China's modernization could not come from the Western-inspired paths of democracy or capitalism. Instead, he saw the future of China in a revolution led by the peasantry, a notion that was at odds with the more orthodox Marxist view, which emphasized the role of the urban proletariat in revolution. Mao argued that the conditions in China, its vast rural population, and the persistence of feudal structures required a different approach. This insight would form the foundation of his revolutionary ideology and would later influence the strategies he employed in his rise to power. While Mao's intellectual and political development was taking place in the capital, the political situation in China continued to worsen. The country was divided into territories controlled by rival warlords, and the central government in Beijing was weak and ineffective. The May 4th movement had failed to produce a unified vision for China's future, and many intellectuals turned towards socialism, anarchism, or other radical ideologies as solutions to the country's crisis. It was during this time of national fragmentation that Mao began to see the limitations of the urban-based revolution. The more Mao considered the social and political conditions in China, the more he became convinced that the revolution could not be won in the cities. The industrial proletariat, which had been central to Marxist theory, was too small and too weak in China to be the driving force of change. Instead, Mao looked to the countryside where the majority of the population lived in poverty, under the control of landowners, and often neglected by the central government. Mao's early years in Beijing were also marked by a deepening commitment to the idea of a class struggle, which he came to view as the central force driving history. This view was rooted in Marxist theory, but Mao adapted it to the Chinese context. He saw China as a nation beset by class divisions, and he believed that the revolution would not come from the urban bourgeoisie or the intellectuals, but from the rural peasants who had long been exploited by the aristocracy and the imperialists. Mao's involvement with the CCP began in earnest in 1921. He played a key role in organizing the first National Congress of the CCP, which laid the groundwork for the party's future strategy. At this early stage, Mao's influence was still limited, but his ideas about the role of the peasantry in revolution began to take shape. He argued that the party should focus its efforts on the countryside, organizing peasants to rise up against the landlords and the imperialist forces that controlled their lives. During this time, Mao also began to build relationships with other like-minded intellectuals and political figures. He came into contact with figures like Chen Duxiu, one of the founders of the CCP, and other members of the early communist movement in China. These relationships would prove critical as Mao moved forward in his political career. However, Mao's time in Beijing was not solely focused on politics. It was also a period of personal growth and change. In 1920, Mao married Yang Kaihui, a fellow intellectual and revolutionary. Together they had 2 children, and Mao's life began to take on a more family-oriented aspect. Despite the demands of his political life, Mao's relationship with Yang was one of mutual respect and shared vision, and she would remain an important figure in his life until her tragic death during the early years of the Chinese Civil War. As the years passed, Mao's influence within the CCP began to grow. By the mid-1920s, he had become a leading figure in the party, advocating for the expansion of the revolution into rural areas. His focus on the peasantry, rather than the urban proletariat, marked him as a figure apart from other communist leaders in China, many of whom were more focused on the industrialized cities. Mao's vision for a revolution driven by the peasant class would ultimately become the defining feature of his political career. By the mid-1920s, Mao Zedong was firmly embedded in the intellectual and political currents of the day. He had moved past his early ideological explorations and was now fully engaged in the task of building a revolutionary movement. In 1921, he was a founding member of the Chinese Communist Party, CCP, a small but growing organization determined to change the course of Chinese history. This period marked a decisive turning point in Mao's life as he began to shape his ideas into action. The 1920s were a time of intense political turmoil in China. The country was divided, ruled by rival warlords, and the central government in Beijing was weak and ineffective. Despite the fall of the Qing dynasty a decade earlier, China had not found a stable system of governance. The Nationalist Party, led by Sun Yat-sen, was struggling to consolidate its authority, and many Chinese intellectuals were disillusioned with the inability of the old political structures to modernize and unite the country. Amid this chaos, Mao saw an opportunity for change. Mao's early political career was deeply influenced by the events of the time. In 1923, the CCP formed an alliance with the Nationalist Party, the Kuomintang or KMT, in an attempt to build a united front against the warlords and imperialist powers. Mao, ever the pragmatist, saw the need for collaboration despite ideological differences. He recognized that the struggle against foreign influence and domestic corruption could not be won by one faction alone. The alliance, however, was fraught with tension. The nationalists, led by Sun Yat-sen and later Chiang Kai-shek, were more interested in building a centralized state, while the communists were focused on social revolution. It was during this time that Mao's ideas began to take shape in more concrete terms. In the rural areas of Hunan, Mao began to organize peasants and workers, focusing on the issues that he knew so well from his own childhood: poverty, exploitation, and landlessness. Mao's unique insight into the conditions of China's peasants gave him a perspective that many of his fellow communists lacked. He understood that the success of the revolution could not rely solely on the urban proletariat, as Marx had predicted. Instead, Mao believed that the peasants, the overwhelming majority of the Chinese population, would have to be at the heart of the revolution. In the early years of his career, Mao travelled extensively throughout rural China, where he began to establish connections with the peasantry. He spent a great deal of time listening to the concerns of farmers and workers, learning about their struggles and aspirations. This direct engagement with the people gave him the insights he needed to develop his political strategy. Mao's focus on the peasantry was a defining feature of his career, setting him apart from other communist leaders who were more focused on the urban working class. In 1927, the alliance between the CCP and the Nationalists began to unravel. The nationalist forces, led by Chiang Kai-shek, turned against the communists, launching a violent purge that left thousands of CCP members dead. The Chinese Communist Party was driven underground, and Mao, along with other communist leaders, was forced to go into hiding. This marked the beginning of a period of guerrilla warfare for Mao and the CCP, as they sought to rebuild their forces and continue the struggle for revolution. During this time, Mao's leadership qualities began to emerge more clearly. He understood that the revolution needed to be fought not just in the cities, but in the countryside where the majority of the population lived. He believed that the peasants could be mobilized to fight for their rights and against the forces that oppressed them. Mao's experience in rural China, his understanding of peasant struggles, and his ability to connect with the masses gave him a distinct advantage over other leaders in the CCP. In 1927, Mao and his followers took control of the town of Jinggangshan in southern China, establishing a base for their guerrilla forces. This marked the beginning of the Chinese Soviet Republic, the first base of the communist movement in China. The area was isolated and surrounded by hostile forces, but it offered Mao and his followers the opportunity to build a revolutionary base and gain the support of local peasants. This was a critical moment in Mao's rise to power, as he began to establish the foundations of his leadership. Mao's leadership in Jinggangshan was characterized by his ability to organize and inspire the peasants. He implemented land reforms, redistributing land from the wealthy landlords to the poor farmers. These policies helped to solidify his support among the peasants, who saw Mao as a champion of their rights. His emphasis on the peasantry, rather than the urban proletariat, was a radical departure from Marxist theory, but it was one that would later define his political career. As Mao consolidated his power in the countryside, he also began to expand his influence within the Communist Party. His leadership in Jinggangshan attracted the attention of other communist leaders who began to recognize his strategic brilliance and his ability to connect with the masses. Despite the challenges posed by the nationalist forces and the internal struggles within the Communist Party, Mao's influence continued to grow. The years following the establishment of the Chinese Soviet Republic were a time of great political and military struggle for Mao and the CCP. The nationalists who had retreated to the south launched a series of military campaigns to crush the communist forces. Mao and his followers were forced to retreat, and the CCP embarked on what would become known as the Long March, a grueling year-long journey through hostile territory. During the Long March, Mao's leadership was put to the test. The journey was fraught with danger and hardship, and many of the communist forces were decimated by illness, starvation, and attacks from nationalist troops. However, Mao's resolve never wavered. His ability to inspire his followers and maintain their loyalty, even in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds, was a testament to his leadership. By the time the Long March ended in 1935, Mao had emerged as the undisputed leader of the Chinese Communist Party. The year 1934 marked a turning point in the history of the Chinese Communist Party and Mao Zedong's leadership. After years of struggle and a series of military setbacks, the CCP faced an existential threat from the nationalist forces under Chiang Kai-shek. The nationalists, intent on eradicating the communist movement, launched a series of offensives that forced Mao and his comrades to abandon their base in Jiangxi province. This retreat, which would become one of the most significant events in Mao's rise to power, became known as the Long March. The Long March was not a single, coordinated march, but rather a series of strategic retreats that took place over more than a year. The communist forces, numbering around 86,000 soldiers, began their journey from their base in Jiangxi in October 1934. The goal was to reach the relatively safe and remote areas of Shanxi province in the north. Along the way, they encountered constant attacks from the nationalist forces and difficult natural terrain, including treacherous mountain ranges and vast, barren plains. The marchers faced immense hardship, battling starvation, disease, and exhaustion. Despite these overwhelming challenges, the Long March became a defining moment in Mao's leadership. It was during this grueling retreat that Mao's strategic vision and ability to inspire his followers were put to the ultimate test. As the communist forces made their way through the hostile terrain, Mao's leadership style began to shine. He demonstrated an unwavering commitment to his cause, often putting the well-being of his soldiers above his own. His resilience, determination, and ability to maintain morale among his troops helped him solidify his position as the undisputed leader of the Chinese Communist Party. Mao's success during the Long March was also due to his ability to make critical tactical decisions that kept the communist forces one step ahead of the nationalists. He employed a combination of guerrilla warfare tactics and clever maneuvering, making use of the knowledge and loyalty of the peasantry to sustain his forces. In many instances, the communists relied on the support of local villagers, who provided food, shelter, and information about the movements of the nationalist troops. Though the march was arduous and many lives were lost along the way, it proved to be a turning point for Mao in more ways than one. The Long March not only saved the Communist Party from near annihilation, but also allowed Mao to emerge as the central figure in the CCP. Mao's ideas, particularly his emphasis on the importance of the peasantry in the revolution, became more widely accepted by the party as a whole. The long, exhausting journey brought the communist forces together in a way that no earlier military engagement had. As the march continued, Mao began to solidify his ideological influence over the party. His belief in the centrality of the peasantry as the revolutionary force that could lead China to socialism became more entrenched. Mao's influence over the CCP grew steadily, and by the time the march reached the north, he was recognized as the leader of the communist movement in China. In October 1935, after nearly a year of marching through hostile terrain, the Communist forces finally reached the northern province of Shanxi. Despite the staggering losses and hardships endured along the way, Mao's vision of a communist China remained intact. He had successfully guided his followers through one of the most perilous chapters of the revolution, and the march had not only saved the Communist Party, but also bolstered his standing within the organization. The legacy of the Long March is more than just the survival of the communist forces. It marked the beginning of Mao's transformation into a national hero and a symbol of determination. The march was not only a physical journey, but also a political one. Mao's leadership during this time earned him the trust and loyalty of his comrades, who now saw him as the central figure capable of leading China into a new future. While the nationalist forces had hoped to wipe out the communist movement once and for all, the Long March demonstrated that the communists were far from finished. The event became a rallying cry for future generations of revolutionaries and cemented Mao's place as the central figure in the fight for China's future. The journey itself was a grueling test of endurance, both physically and emotionally. The marchers endured harsh weather conditions, scarce food, and a lack of medical care. The hardships were further compounded by constant attacks from nationalist forces. However, Mao's ability to inspire hope and unity among the communist troops ensured that they continued forward despite the overwhelming odds. Though the Long March had ended, it was far from the end of the struggle. Mao and his followers had found a safe haven in Shanxi. But the war with the nationalists was far from over. The Long March had provided the communists with a temporary reprieve, but they still faced formidable challenges ahead. Mao's leadership, however, had been solidified, and he was now in a stronger position to continue the revolution. The Long March had transformed Mao from a relatively obscure leader into the undisputed head of the Communist Party. His leadership during this time had shown that he was not only a tactician, but also a man of great vision and resilience. His ideas on the importance of the peasantry and his ability to unite the communist forces in the face of adversity made him the undisputed leader of the movement. As the revolution continued to unfold, Mao's place at the helm of the Chinese Communist Party was now firmly established. In the years that followed, the memory of the Long March would become an enduring symbol of the communist struggle in China. The march became the foundation of Mao's mythos, and its legacy would shape the future of China for decades to come. The completion of the Long March in 1935 was not an end, but rather a new beginning for Mao Zedong and the Chinese Communist Party. After a year of relentless hardships, Mao and his forces found a temporary refuge in the isolated mountainous region of northern Shanxi, where they could regroup and recover. This remote area would become the heart of Mao's base, where he would continue to consolidate his power and further solidify his leadership within the Communist Party. Upon reaching Shanxi, Mao's leadership was virtually uncontested within the CCP. His triumph over adversity during the Long March had earned him the loyalty and admiration of his followers, and his influence within the party had grown significantly. Though Mao was not the only leader of the CCP, his strategic vision had set him apart. The party's survival, in his view, was tied not to the urban proletariat as Marx had suggested, but to the vast, untapped revolutionary potential of the rural peasantry. His emphasis on the peasantry as the central force of China's revolution was becoming increasingly accepted as the guiding principle of the CCP's ideology. In the years following the Long March, Mao set about transforming the Chinese Communist forces into a formidable military and political force. Under his guidance, the Communist Party shifted its focus to the countryside, rallying the peasantry to join the fight against the nationalist government. Mao's strategic use of guerrilla warfare, which had been effective during the Long March, continued to play a critical role in the CCP's efforts to gain ground. Mao's vision of a peasant-led revolution would prove to be a defining characteristic of his leadership. In the remote areas of Shanxi, the CCP implemented land reforms that redistributed land from wealthy landlords to the poor peasants. These land reforms not only helped to solidify Mao's support among the rural population, but also helped to create a model for the future of Communist China. The reforms were designed to weaken the power of the landowning class and promote greater social and economic equality. This grassroots approach was in stark contrast to the policies of the nationalist government, which had failed to address the needs of the majority of China's population. Mao also worked to strengthen the ideological foundation of the Communist Party, emphasizing the importance of Marxist-Leninist thought as the guiding force behind the revolution. While the nationalist government under Chiang Kai-shek continued to struggle with its internal divisions and the pressure of Japanese imperialism, the Communist Party under Mao's leadership was beginning to gain ground in the struggle for China's future. The internal unity of the Communist Party was critical to Mao's consolidation of power. He understood that the CCP needed to present a unified front in order to successfully challenge the nationalists and maintain its legitimacy in the eyes of the Chinese people. In the years following the Long March, Mao worked to eliminate potential rivals within the party, further solidifying his position as the undisputed leader. His ruthless pragmatism, which has been evident during the Long March, became a key characteristic of his leadership style. By the time the Second Sino-Japanese War broke out in 1937, the CCP had transformed into a significant force in Chinese politics. The war against Japan provided Mao with an opportunity to expand the influence of the Communist Party and challenge the nationalist for control of China. The war was a defining moment in China's history, and Mao understood that the conflict would provide the CCP with the chance to gain widespread support, especially among the rural population. During the war, Mao's leadership was crucial to the success of the Communist Party. As the nationalist government focused on defending the cities and larger urban centers from the Japanese invasion, the communist forces concentrated on building support in the rural areas. Mao's use of guerrilla warfare and his ability to rally the peasantry helped the CCP expand its influence across vast areas of northern and central China. This strategy of focusing on the countryside, where the majority of the population lived, allowed Mao to secure a foothold in areas that had previously been outside the CCP's control. Mao's ability to inspire loyalty among the peasants was a key factor in the success of the Communist Party during this period. He was not only seen as a military leader but also as a symbol of hope for the rural masses who had long suffered under the control of landlords and the corrupt nationalist government. The CCP's land reform policies, which had redistributed land to the peasants, helped to strengthen Mao's support base, and the rural population began to view him as a champion of their rights. At the same time, the CCP had to navigate the delicate relationship with the nationalists during the war. The two parties, which had once been rivals, formed a tenuous alliance in the face of the Japanese threat. This cooperation, however, was fraught with tension, as the nationalists continued to view the communists with suspicion and mistrust. Despite the shared goal of defeating Japan, the ideological differences between the CCP and the KMT remained a major point of contention. Mao, ever the strategist, used the war to further his own goals. He sought to weaken the nationalists while simultaneously expanding the communist presence in rural areas. He also worked to build a reputation for the CCP as the true defenders of China, portraying the nationalists as ineffective and corrupt. Mao's ability to adapt to the changing political landscape and his skill in navigating the complex relationships between the CCP, the nationalists and the Japanese occupiers ensured that the Communist Party would emerge from the war in a stronger position. By the end of the Second Sino-Japanese War in 1945, the CCP had grown exponentially in strength and influence. Mao's leadership during this period, marked by his ability to unify the party, build support among the peasantry, and strategically weaken the nationalists, laid the foundation for the eventual victory of the communists in the Chinese Civil War. The war had not only helped to elevate Mao to the pinnacle of power, but had also positioned the Communist Party as the legitimate force for change in China. By the end of the Second Sino-Japanese War in 1945, Mao Zedong and the Chinese Communist Party, CCP, had gained considerable ground, both militarily and ideologically. The war had provided Mao with an opportunity to solidify his leadership and the influence of the CCP, particularly in the rural areas. Now, the Chinese Civil War, the long-standing struggle for control of China between the CCP and the nationalist government under Chiang Kai-shek, would enter its final, decisive phase. After the Japanese surrender, China was left in a fragile state. The nationalist government, weakened by years of war, struggled to reassert its control over the country. The Chinese Communist Party, on the other hand, had grown in strength, particularly in the countryside. During the war, the CCP had built a broad base of support among the rural population, who had benefited from Mao's land reforms. These reforms, which redistributed land to the peasants, had created a loyal following for the communists, as they were seen as champions of the common people. Mao's ability to inspire hope and rally the rural masses had made him the central figure in the communist movement. The stage was now set for the final struggle between the nationalists and the communists. Though both sides had fought against Japan, their underlying ideological differences remained deep. The nationalists, led by Chiang Kai-shek, were committed to preserving China's traditional social and political order, while the communists sought to create a new society based on Marxist-Leninist principles, with a focus on class struggle and social equality. Mao's leadership had made it clear that the future of China, in his view, lay with the peasants, not the urban elites. As the civil war resumed, Mao's forces focused on mobilizing the peasantry, who had grown disillusioned with the nationalist government's inability to address their needs. The nationalist army, though numerically superior, faced significant challenges in holding territory, particularly in the countryside. Mao's forces used guerrilla warfare tactics to harass nationalist troops and gradually gained control of key areas, especially in northern and central China. One of Mao's greatest strengths as a leader was his ability to adapt his military strategy to the changing circumstances of the war. In contrast to Chiang Kai-shek, who relied on conventional warfare and struggled with internal corruption and inefficient leadership, Mao understood that the key to victory lay in the support of the people. He had long believed that the peasantry was the backbone of the revolution, and now, in the final stages of the civil war, his vision was being realized. Mao also focused on winning the ideological battle. He portrayed the nationalist government as corrupt and ineffective, while the CCP presented itself as a party of reform and revolution. Mao's emphasis on land reform, social equality, and the promise of a better future for China's peasants resonated deeply with the population. In many rural areas, the CCP was seen as a force for positive change, in contrast to the nationalist government, which was increasingly seen as out of touch with the needs of the people. The final years of the Civil War were marked by a series of decisive battles between the two sides. The communists, under Mao's leadership, emerged victorious in key confrontations, gradually pushing the nationalist forces back. In 1947, the CCP launched a series of successful offensives in the northeast and the Central Plains, and by the end of 1948, the nationalist forces had been forced to retreat to the island of Taiwan. The victory of the CCP was inevitable, as Mao's forces had gained the upper hand both militarily and politically. The victory in the Civil War was not just a military triumph, but also a political one. Mao had successfully built a broad coalition of peasants, workers and intellectuals, united under the banner of the Communist Party. His ability to unite diverse groups around the common cause of revolution was a testament to his leadership and vision. The CCP's victory in the Civil War marked the end of the nationalist era and the beginning of a new chapter in Chinese history. On October 1st, 1949, Mao Zedong stood before a crowd in Tiananmen Square and proclaimed the founding of the People's Republic of China. The event marked the culmination of years of struggle and sacrifice. For Mao, it was the realization of his vision of a new China, a country free from foreign imperialism and ruled by the people. The establishment of the People's Republic of China was a momentous occasion in the history of the Chinese Revolution, and it was the beginning of Mao's rule over the country. In the aftermath of the Civil War, Mao faced the daunting task of rebuilding China, which had been ravaged by decades of war. The country was in ruins, its infrastructure destroyed, and its people weary from years of conflict. Yet Mao's confidence in the future remained unshaken. He saw the revolution as a long-term process, and the foundation for a new China had been laid. The communists under Mao's leadership would begin the work of transforming China into a socialist state, based on the principles of Marxism-Leninism. Though the victory in the Civil War was a historic achievement, it also marked the beginning of new challenges for Mao and the Communist Party. The economic and social conditions of post-war China were dire, and the task of rebuilding the country would be immense. Yet Mao's leadership, his connection with the people, and his ability to maintain the loyalty of his followers would help guide China through these difficult times. On October 1st, 1949, Mao Zedong declared the founding of the People's Republic of China from the balcony of Tiananmen Square. This moment marked the end of a long and tumultuous struggle, the culmination of the Chinese Communist Party's years of revolution, and the triumph of Mao's vision. After over 2 decades of civil war, foreign invasion, and ideological battles, China was finally united under the banner of the Communist Party, with Mao Zedong at its helm. The newly established People's Republic faced monumental challenges. The country was economically devastated, with its infrastructure in ruins. The population had endured years of conflict, and the communist forces had to contend with the task of rebuilding a fractured society. Despite the overwhelming sense of victory, Mao understood that the journey was far from over. The revolution had won the country's independence. But now, the task was to create a society that would reflect the values of the new regime: equality, social justice, and the eventual realization of socialism. Mao's vision for China was radical. His goal was to transform the country from an agrarian society into a modern socialist state. To achieve this, the new government embarked on ambitious programs of land reform, nationalization of industries, and the creation of a planned economy. The first few years of the People's Republic were focused on stabilizing the nation and implementing these reforms, which Mao saw as critical for China's future. Land reform was one of the central policies implemented by Mao and the Communist Party. The system of land ownership in China had long been dominated by a small, wealthy landowning class, while the majority of the population, peasants, lived in poverty. One of the first acts of the new government was to redistribute land to the peasants, a move that earned Mao significant support among the rural population. The land reform program was carried out with a sense of urgency, as it sought to dismantle the old feudal system and empower the masses. This policy, while popular with peasants, was also marked by violence and class struggles, as the landlords and those who supported the old order resisted the change. The land reforms created tensions within rural communities, but they ultimately helped to secure the support of the vast majority of China's population, the peasantry. Mao also sought to reshape China's economy. The country's economy had been deeply affected by the wars and invasions of the previous decades, and it was underdeveloped by comparison to many Western countries. The early years of the People's Republic saw the nationalization of key industries, including coal, steel, and manufacturing. This process was part of Mao's vision for centralizing economic control and laying the groundwork for a planned socialist economy. The government took control of banks and trade, and a system of collectivization was introduced, especially in agriculture. The communist government hoped to use these policies to rapidly industrialize and modernize China. However, Mao's economic policies were not without their difficulties. The collectivization efforts were met with resistance in some areas, and the centralized control of industry often resulted in inefficiency. In particular, the agricultural sector struggled. While Mao's land reforms had been widely popular, the subsequent push for collectivized farming was not as successful. The promise of greater productivity through collective farming failed to materialize in many regions, and agricultural output did not increase as expected. This created tensions between Mao and the local leadership, as well as growing discontent in rural areas. Mao's focus was not only on economic transformation, but also on ideological transformation. The Communist Party sought to indoctrinate the population with Marxist-Leninist principles, creating a new socialist culture. The government's policies emphasized collective work, the rejection of old traditions, and the importance of class struggle. Mao saw education and propaganda as vital tools in achieving this transformation. The government implemented campaigns to educate the population on the principles of socialism, and mass mobilizations were often organized to foster unity and promote loyalty to the Communist Party. In these early years, Mao's policies focused heavily on creating a new social order, one that was founded on equality and solidarity. The government worked to eliminate the old class hierarchies and social divisions, and Mao sought to eliminate the influence of the old intellectual elite. The new government viewed traditional Confucian values as part of the old system that needed to be eradicated in order to pave the way for a socialist society. This ideological transformation was meant to go hand in hand with the economic changes, creating a new China that was both socially and economically aligned with Marxist principles. Mao's vision for a new China was not without its contradictions. While the government promoted egalitarianism and social justice, it was also marked by an increasingly authoritarian approach. Political dissent was not tolerated, and those who opposed the regime were often silenced through imprisonment or even execution. The Communist Party's control over the country grew increasingly tight, and by the late 1950s, Mao would be ready to embark on even more ambitious social experiments. While these early years of the People's Republic were marked by some successes, such as the consolidation of power and land reform, they also laid the groundwork for some of the difficulties that would follow. The ambitious goals of Mao's policies, particularly in economic transformation, would soon lead to the challenges of managing a rapidly changing society. While the Communist Party had succeeded in establishing a new political order, the reality of governing a country as vast and diverse as China presented Mao and his leadership with complex problems that they would struggle to address in the coming years. The consolidation of power in the early years of the People's Republic also marked the beginning of Mao's increasing dominance within the Communist Party. His leadership was now unquestioned, but the policies he pursued would soon test the limits of the revolution's potential. Despite the challenges ahead, Mao's vision for China remained unwavering. His commitment to the socialist transformation of China would define the trajectory of his leadership for the next several decades. By the late 1950s, Mao Zedong's vision for China had expanded beyond the foundations of the People's Republic. Having successfully consolidated communist control and implemented early land reforms, Mao sought to accelerate China's transformation from an agrarian society to an industrialized socialist nation. The vehicle for this transformation was the Great Leap Forward, an ambitious and controversial economic campaign launched in 1958. The idea behind the Great Leap Forward was simple but audacious. Mao believed that China could bypass the stages of industrialization that had taken Western nations centuries to complete. Drawing inspiration from the success of collective farming in the Soviet Union, Mao pushed for the rapid collectivization of agriculture. hoping that large-scale farms would lead to increased productivity. He also sought to harness China's vast peasant population for industrial projects, with the goal of achieving rapid growth in both agriculture and industry. One of the key components of the Great Leap Forward was the establishment of people's communes, large collective farming units where peasants worked together to produce food and other goods. The idea was to centralize agriculture and ensure that every person in China contributed to the collective effort. Mao believed that by organizing the rural population in this way, China could achieve immense productivity gains, using the power of the collective to overcome individual inefficiencies. Mao's vision extended beyond agriculture. As part of the Great Leap Forward, the government called for the creation of backyard furnaces, where peasants were encouraged to smelt scrap metal to create steel. The idea was to rapidly expand China's industrial base by increasing steel production. The government hoped that by mobilizing the masses, it could achieve the same rapid industrialization that had taken place in the Soviet Union. However, the people's communes and the steel campaign quickly ran into problems. The early years of the Great Leap Forward saw some success on paper. Production targets were set, and large-scale projects were launched. However, the reality of the initiative soon became apparent. Collectivization led to disruptions in agricultural production, as peasants were forced to abandon their individual farms and join the collective system. The agricultural policies, which promised higher yields, quickly faltered. The inefficiencies of the communes, lack of experience, and pressure to meet unrealistic production targets led to a decline in crop yields, rather than the increase that Mao had hoped for. The removal of local knowledge and experience in farming from individual farmers who had previously managed their own land further contributed to the failure. Mao's push for mass industrialization through backyard furnaces, which turned out to be poorly constructed and inefficient, also resulted in disastrous consequences. The production of low-quality steel not only failed to boost China's industrial output, but also diverted labor from agriculture and other productive industries. Instead of creating lasting industrial progress, the backyard furnaces produced little of value and left the country with large amounts of unusable metal. As the policies of the Great Leap Forward began to unravel, the consequences for the Chinese population were dire. By 1960, the country was facing widespread famine, with an estimated 15 to 45 million people dying as a result of starvation and malnutrition. The people's communes had become increasingly unproductive, and the collectivization experiment had failed to meet its goals. Rural areas suffered as a result of crop failures, the collapse of local economies, and a breakdown in the food distribution system. The famine that accompanied the Great Leap Forward marked one of the darkest chapters in China's history. Mao, who had once been hailed as the visionary leader who would lead China to prosperity, faced increasing criticism. Within the Communist Party, many of Mao's colleagues, including his trusted ally Liu Shaoqi, began to question the viability of the Great Leap Forward and its policies. In response to mounting criticism, Mao withdrew from active leadership, although he retained his position as the head of the Communist Party. The Great Leap Forward had severely damaged Mao's reputation and had exposed the shortcomings of his economic policies. In the aftermath of the Great Leap Forward, China was left to pick up the pieces. The government scaled back its collectivization efforts, and many of the people's communes were dismantled. The failure of the campaign had not only resulted in economic disaster, but had also led to a crisis of confidence in Mao's leadership. For a time, the Communist Party distanced itself from Mao's economic policies, and his influence within the government diminished. Despite the setbacks of the Great Leap Forward, Mao's leadership was not entirely undone. He remained a central figure in the party and in the lives of the Chinese people, his power far from extinguished. However, the failure of the Great Leap Forward had marked a critical turning point in Mao's rule. The disaster caused by the failed policies led Mao to reconsider his approach and his methods of governance, and it would set the stage for the next phase of his leadership, the Cultural Revolution. The Great Leap Forward had shown the limits of Mao's ability to enact rapid, sweeping change. Though he had inspired millions with his vision for a new China, the disaster that followed proved that even the most revolutionary ideas could have disastrous consequences when implemented without careful consideration of the country's capabilities and needs. As the country began to recover from the economic devastation, the Communist Party would begin to reassert itself, albeit under different leadership and in a different direction. In the wake of the Great Leap Forward disaster, Mao Zedong's authority within the Chinese Communist Party had been severely undermined. The catastrophic economic failure, coupled with the widespread famine, led to increasing disillusionment among the people and a reassessment of his leadership. Although Mao withdrew from the day-to-day running of the government, his desire to reassert control over both the party and the people was far from over. In 1966, Mao would embark on one of the most radical and controversial movements of his leadership, the Cultural Revolution. The Cultural Revolution was at its core an attempt by Mao to purge the Communist Party of those he saw as enemies of the revolution and to reinstate his authority. Mao feared that China's leadership had become increasingly bureaucratic and revisionist, moving away from the ideals of the revolution. He believed that intellectuals, along with certain party officials, were undermining the socialist vision of the Chinese state. The Cultural Revolution aimed to address these issues by attacking the perceived bourgeois elements within Chinese society and returning to the revolutionary ideals of the early Communist Party. Mao's first move in initiating the Cultural Revolution was to galvanize the youth. He called on young people, particularly students, to take up the cause and to challenge authority in every form. This led to the formation of the Red Guards, a radical and zealous group of young people who were encouraged to attack anyone seen as a counter-revolutionary or an enemy of the Communist Party. These Red Guards played a central role in the Cultural Revolution, as they carried out mass campaigns of persecution, public humiliation, and violence against intellectuals, perceived enemies, and even their own families. The Cultural Revolution had a profound impact on Chinese society. Schools were shut down, intellectuals were purged, and the culture of China was turned upside down. Mao's ideology of constant revolution once again became the guiding principle. The old customs, culture, habits, and ideas were attacked as four olds, and the Red Guards were tasked with eradicating them from Chinese society. Temples, books, and works of art were destroyed, and people were publicly denounced, humiliated, and in some cases even killed. During this time, the Chinese people lived in a climate of fear and uncertainty. The Red Guards wielded enormous power, and anyone could be accused of being a counter-revolutionary. Intellectuals, teachers, and artists were particularly vulnerable, as they were seen as the embodiment of the old society that Mao wanted to eliminate. Many were tortured, sent to labor camps, or forced to publicly confess their crimes. The Cultural Revolution effectively turned China into a place where suspicion and denunciation were rampant, and anyone could be accused of being disloyal to the revolution. Mao's goal during the Cultural Revolution was to restore his own authority within the party, and to revive the revolutionary zeal that had characterized the early years of communist rule. By mobilizing the youth against the older generation of communist leaders, he sought to eliminate anyone who might challenge his leadership. The Cultural Revolution was also seen as an attempt to curb the rise of pragmatism in the party, and to remind the Chinese people that the revolution was not over. Mao wanted to create a society where revolution was perpetual, and where the Communist Party was constantly refreshed by the energy of youth and ideology. However, the Cultural Revolution soon spiraled out of control. While Mao had intended to purge the party of dissent and restore his influence, the movement led to widespread chaos and social disintegration. The Red Guards often targeted innocent people, and entire communities were disrupted. The purging of intellectuals and the destruction of cultural heritage created a lasting legacy of violence and trauma in Chinese society. The economy, already fragile from the Great Leap Forward, was further disrupted, and China's educational system and intellectual life were set back for years. Mao, who had initially encouraged the Cultural Revolution, began to lose control of the movement as it spread beyond his original intent. The Red Guards began to target not only intellectuals but also Communist Party officials who were seen as insufficiently revolutionary. The country descended into a state of near anarchy, with different factions of the Red Guards fighting each other and challenging local government authorities. In 1969, Mao sought to rein in the chaos by calling on the Red Guards to return to their villages, but the damage had already been done. The Cultural Revolution had left deep scars on China's social and political fabric. By the early 1970s, Mao's health was in decline, and the excesses of the Cultural Revolution had alienated many within the Communist Party. While Mao continued to hold symbolic power, his influence over the day-to-day governance of China had waned. The Cultural Revolution, which had begun as a movement to consolidate Mao's power, had instead left the country in turmoil and disarray. The Cultural Revolution officially ended in 1976 with Mao's death, but its impact would linger for decades. The movement had irreparably altered Chinese society, and the scars of the violence, purges and destruction would be felt long after Mao's passing. In the years that followed, the Chinese government under Deng Xiaoping would begin the process of reform, acknowledging the failures of the Cultural Revolution and seeking to move China away from the chaos that had characterized Mao's later years. Mao's legacy, particularly as it pertains to the Cultural Revolution, remains a subject of great controversy. While some view him as a hero who sought to defend the revolution and create a more egalitarian society, others see him as a dictator whose policies caused immense suffering and left China deeply scarred. The Cultural Revolution exemplifies both Mao's ability to inspire loyalty and his willingness to engage in extreme measures to maintain power. It was a period in which Mao sought to reshape not only the political system of China, but its very culture and identity. The Cultural Revolution formally ended in 1976, with the death of Mao Zedong and the subsequent political shift that followed. The period of extreme upheaval and ideological purging had left China deeply scarred. Society once again found itself in a state of disarray, as years of radical policies, mass violence and ideological fervour had taken a toll on the country's social and economic systems. The Communist Party, once united under Mao, was now fractured and facing the daunting task of rebuilding the nation. Mao's death marked the end of an era, and the leadership that emerged in the wake of his passing sought to confront the chaos left by the Cultural Revolution. While Mao's legacy was still revered by many, there was a growing recognition of the need for change. Under the leadership of figures like Deng Xiaoping, the Communist Party began to shift away from the radical policies of the past and towards economic and political reforms that would steer China in a new direction. Deng Xiaoping, who had been a key figure within the party, gradually emerged as the de facto leader after Mao's death. Although Deng had been purged during the Cultural Revolution, he returned to power in the early 1970s and began the process of dismantling many of the policies that had defined Mao's later years. Deng understood that China could not continue on the path set by Mao during the Cultural Revolution. The destruction of intellectual life, the purging of skilled workers, and the disruption of agriculture and industry had left China in a precarious position. Economic reform and modernization were necessary for China to regain its stability and ensure its future prosperity. One of the first steps Deng took was to shift away from the rigid collectivization and the planned economy that had been central to Mao's policies. The disastrous failures of the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution had made it clear that these radical economic experiments were unsustainable. Deng initiated reforms that allowed for a degree of market-oriented policies, which would eventually lead to the opening up of China's economy. The introduction of special economic zones, SEZs, in coastal cities, where market-oriented reforms could be tested, marked the beginning of China's transformation into an economic powerhouse. The economic reforms introduced by Deng were not just about opening China up to market forces, they also represented a broader shift in ideology. The focus moved away from the strict adherence to Marxist-Leninist principles and towards pragmatism and economic development. Deng's famous phrase, "It doesn't matter whether a cat is black or white as long as it catches mice," reflected this pragmatic approach to governance. The goal was to modernize China and improve living standards, and Deng was willing to adopt policies that were previously seen as contrary to communist ideals in order to achieve these goals. While Deng's economic reforms brought growth and prosperity to many parts of China, the effects of the Cultural Revolution were still being felt. The intellectual and cultural life of China had been severely damaged, and it would take years for the country to recover from the losses incurred during the radical years of the Cultural Revolution. The suppression of intellectuals, artists, and independent thought left a void in China's intellectual and creative fields. Many of the country's best minds had been silenced or exiled during the radical years, and rebuilding the intellectual and cultural fabric of Chinese society would be a long-term endeavor. In addition to the economic and intellectual recovery, the Communist Party faced the challenge of rebuilding its legitimacy. Mao's death had left a power vacuum within the party, and though Deng became the party's leading figure, he had to navigate a complex political landscape. Mao's legacy remained a sensitive issue, as there were still many who revered him as the founding father of the People's Republic of China. The Cultural Revolution, while a failure in many respects, had also been an important part of the party's history, and its legacy could not be easily erased. In the years following Mao's death, the party engaged in a process of de-Maoization, acknowledging the mistakes of the Cultural Revolution, while still recognizing Mao as a pivotal figure in Chinese history. The shift away from Mao's policies also marked a change in China's foreign policy. During Mao's later years, China had been isolated from the global community, with tensions between China and the West at an all-time high. However, under Deng's leadership, China began to open up to the outside world. The normalization of relations with the United States in the 1970s, culminating in President Richard Nixon's visit to China in 1972, was a significant step in this process. China's engagement with the global economy grew throughout the 1980s, and the country began to establish itself as a major player on the world stage. Despite the reforms and changes brought about in the post-Mao period, the Cultural Revolution left an indelible mark on China. The violence and chaos of the movement were a reminder of the dangers of unchecked political power and the consequences of radical ideology. Mao's vision of continuous revolution, once so powerful and appealing to millions, had ultimately led China to a period of unprecedented destruction. The Cultural Revolution had tested the limits of loyalty, and in the aftermath the country was left with a deep sense of loss. The Cultural Revolution also led to a new sense of political awareness among the Chinese people. The atrocities committed during the movement, mass purges, arbitrary arrests, public humiliation, and the destruction of cultural heritage, created a collective trauma that shaped the nation's psyche. For many, the Cultural Revolution was a time of personal suffering and upheaval, and the scars of that period remained long after the movement had ended. In the years following Mao's death, China would undergo significant political and economic transformation. The country's embrace of market reforms and opening to the world brought prosperity to millions. But the shadow of the Cultural Revolution lingered. As China moved forward, it was forced to confront its past while striving to build a future that could heal the wounds left by decades of turmoil. As China emerged from the chaos of the Cultural Revolution, the need for stability and recovery became clear. Under Mao, the country had been marked by radical ideological campaigns and economic experimentation with mixed results. With Mao's passing in 1976, the Communist Party led by Deng Xiaoping recognized that China could not afford to continue on the same path. A new approach was needed, one that would address the economic challenges of the country, encourage growth, and modernize its infrastructure. This was the beginning of China's reform and opening up period, a crucial moment that would dramatically reshape the nation. Deng Xiaoping, having emerged as China's leader after Mao's death, was central to the new direction. Though he was not officially the head of state, Deng was the true power behind the throne, and his pragmatism was key to transforming the country. Unlike Mao, who had advocated for radical policies like the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution, Deng recognized the importance of economic reform, opening China to foreign investment and creating market mechanisms within a socialist framework. He famously said, "It doesn't matter whether a cat is black or white as long as it catches mice," illustrating his pragmatic approach to governance. The reform and opening up began in 1978 with the third plenary session of the 11th Central Committee of the Communist Party. At this meeting, Deng and other reformist leaders introduced a series of measures that would move China away from the strict central planning and collectivization of the past. The first steps included decollectivizing agriculture and allowing farmers to manage their land in smaller family-based units. The introduction of the household responsibility system gave individual farmers the ability to keep the surplus of their production after fulfilling state quotas, effectively increasing agricultural output and improving rural living standards. One of the most significant moves in the early stages of reform was the creation of special economic zones, SEZs, in coastal areas like Shenzhen. These zones were experimental areas where market-oriented reforms could be tested. Foreign investment was encouraged, and private businesses were allowed to operate under a more relaxed regulatory framework than in the rest of China. These zones became the engine of China's economic growth, attracting foreign companies and technology, spurring industrialization, and creating new jobs. Shenzhen, once a small fishing village, became one of the most dynamic cities in the world. The economic reforms introduced by Deng were not limited to agriculture and industry. There was a broader restructuring of China's economy, with state-owned enterprises, SOEs, being reformed to increase productivity. While the government maintained control over key sectors, the introduction of market mechanisms and competition within state-owned firms marked a major shift. The shift to a market-oriented economy meant that the command economy, which had been a hallmark of Mao's rule, was gradually replaced with a system that allowed for private entrepreneurship, foreign trade, and investment. The reform and opening up period also led to a dramatic increase in foreign trade. As China's economy grew and became more integrated into the global economy, the country emerged as a major manufacturing hub. Foreign companies flocked to China to take advantage of its large, low-cost labor force. The export-driven growth model allowed China to become the world's factory, producing goods that were sold across the globe. This created millions of jobs and lifted hundreds of millions of people out of poverty, drastically transforming the standard of living for many Chinese citizens. One of the major successes of the reform and opening up was the increase in living standards for ordinary Chinese citizens. As the economy grew, so did wages and access to consumer goods. For the first time in decades, Chinese citizens began to experience a rise in material wealth. People who had once been subject to strict rationing of goods now found themselves with greater access to food, clothing, and electronics. Rural areas, once deeply impoverished, saw improvements in infrastructure, healthcare, and education as economic growth extended beyond the coastal regions. However, the reforms also created significant challenges. The rapid pace of industrialization and economic growth led to environmental degradation, as China's factories spewed pollutants into the air and rivers. The country's reliance on coal for energy created widespread pollution, and the growth of cities resulted in overcrowding and strained infrastructure. Additionally, the shift toward a market economy exacerbated income inequality, as coastal regions and urban centers reaped the benefits of growth, while rural areas lagged behind. The reform process also caused social unrest, as millions of workers in state-owned enterprises faced layoffs, and many farmers struggled with increasing competition in the agricultural market. Another challenge that came with the economic reforms was the rise of corruption. The new system, with its emphasis on rapid growth and market incentives, created opportunities for bribery, mismanagement, and exploitation. As local officials became more powerful in a decentralized system, corruption flourished at various levels of government, which eroded public trust in the ruling party. Despite these challenges, Deng Xiaoping's economic reforms were widely regarded as a success. They transformed China from a largely agrarian economy into one of the world's leading industrial powers. The reform period led to unprecedented economic growth, lifting China from poverty and placing it at the center of the global economy. The success of the reforms laid the foundation for China's rise in the 21st century, as the country continued to modernize its economy and increase its global influence. Deng Xiaoping's vision for China was centered on the idea that economic development, rather than strict adherence to ideology, was the key to the country's future. His pragmatic approach, which combined socialist principles with market mechanisms, helped China achieve rapid development while maintaining political stability under the Communist Party. This balance of economic liberalization and political control became a hallmark of China's approach to modernization. However, the reform and opening up period also raised fundamental questions about the future of China's political system. While the economy was being transformed, the political system remained largely unchanged. The Communist Party continued to hold a monopoly on power, and political dissent was not tolerated. As China's economic power grew, so did its desire for greater influence on the world stage. But the gap between China's economic power and its political system became increasingly apparent. The issues of political freedom, human rights, and individual expression would later come to the forefront in the 1989 Tiananmen Square protests. But during the 1980s, Deng's reforms were seen as a way to move China forward without sacrificing the party's control. In the 1980s, China's rapid economic growth under Deng Xiaoping's reforms began to create an increasingly complex society. While the economy boomed and millions of people experienced rising living standards, political reform lagged behind. The Communist Party retained tight control over the political system, and dissent was not tolerated. However, as the country modernized, the gap between China's economic prosperity and its political system became more apparent, leading to rising tensions among the Chinese populace. In 1989, these tensions came to a head in the form of the Tiananmen Square protests, one of the most pivotal moments in modern Chinese history. The protests were driven by a combination of factors: growing frustration with political corruption, a call for greater political freedoms, dissatisfaction with the pace of reform, and the influence of global ideas of democracy. Students, intellectuals, and workers took to the streets, demanding political reform, an end to corruption, and greater individual freedoms. The protests began in April 1989, when students at Beijing's prestigious Peking University gathered to mourn the death of Hu Yaobang, a former Communist Party leader who'd been sympathetic to political reform and who'd been ousted from his position due to his liberal views. His death became a rallying point for students and others who were dissatisfied with the Communist Party's lack of political openness and reform. As word spread, more students from other universities as well as workers and intellectuals, joined the demonstrations, calling for greater political freedom, freedom of speech, and government accountability. The protests were initially peaceful, with demonstrators gathering in Tiananmen Square, a symbol of Chinese political life. The square became the focal point of the movement, as thousands of protesters camped out in the heart of Beijing demanding change. The protesters used the square to voice their concerns about corruption, inflation, and the lack of democratic reforms in a country that had made tremendous strides in economic development. The scene was marked by students engaging in peaceful demonstrations, holding banners calling for greater political freedom and an end to the corruption of the Communist Party. As the days passed, the protests grew larger, drawing support from a broad cross-section of Chinese society, including intellectuals, workers, and even some members of the Communist Party, who were disillusioned with the government's lack of reform. The government, initially unsure of how to respond, began to take a harder stance. The Chinese leadership, led by Deng Xiaoping and other senior party officials, feared that the protests represented a threat to the party's monopoly on power and to the stability of the state. Tensions between the protesters and the government grew as the protests continued into June. On the night of June 3rd to 4th, the Chinese government made the fateful decision to use military force to disperse the protesters. The military, armed with tanks and rifles, moved in to clear the square. The use of force was brutal, and the Chinese military opened fire on unarmed civilians. The crackdown resulted in the deaths of hundreds, possibly thousands of people, though the exact number remains unclear to this day. The government declared martial law, and troops and tanks were deployed throughout Beijing to suppress the protests. The government's response to the Tiananmen Square protests shocked the world and drew widespread condemnation from the international community. Images of students standing in front of tanks, particularly the iconic image of the Tank Man, a lone protester blocking a column of tanks, became symbols of the tragic events and were broadcast worldwide. The government's violent suppression of the protests left a lasting scar on Chinese society and marked a turning point in the country's modern history. In the aftermath of the crackdown, the Chinese government moved quickly to censor information about the events in Tiananmen Square. The media was heavily restricted, and discussion of the protests was suppressed within China. The government portrayed the crackdown as necessary to maintain order and stability, framing the protesters as counter-revolutionaries who posed a threat to the nation's security. However, many in China and around the world saw the events as a tragic loss of life and an assault on basic human rights. While the Tiananmen Square protests were crushed, the demands for political reform did not disappear. The crackdown exposed the limits of China's political system, and many people began to question whether the country's economic success could be fully realized without political change. For many Chinese citizens, the Tiananmen Square protests represented a moment of awakening, a desire for a society that balanced economic prosperity with greater political freedoms. After the protests, the Chinese government tightened its control over the political system, reaffirming its commitment to maintaining the one-party rule of the Communist Party. Deng Xiaoping, who had been the architect of the economic reforms that brought China into the global market, remained in power and was largely unscathed by the protests. In the years following the crackdown, China would continue to modernize economically, but the political system would remain firmly under the control of the Communist Party, with limited room for dissent. Despite the suppression of the protests, the Tiananmen Square incident left a lasting impact on China's political culture. The events of 1989 revealed the deep desire for political reform and the limits of the Communist Party's authority in a rapidly changing society. The crackdown also highlighted the stark contrast between China's economic transformation and its political system, a tension that would continue to shape China's development in the years to come. Today, the Tiananmen Square protests remain a sensitive and taboo subject in China. with discussion of the event still censored and restricted. The government has worked hard to erase the memory of the protests from the public consciousness, but for many, the events of June 1989 remain an enduring symbol of the struggle for political reform in China. While economic progress has continued, the questions raised by the Tiananmen Square protests about political openness, human rights, and individual freedoms continue to echo in the background of China's modern history. In the years following the Tiananmen Square protests, China continued its path of economic growth, driven by the reforms introduced by Deng Xiaoping and his successors. Although the political system remained tightly controlled by the Communist Party, the nation's economic transformation was undeniable. As China's economy expanded, so too did its global influence, making it one of the most significant players on the world stage by the early 21st century. The economic reforms that began in the late 1970s had laid the groundwork for China's remarkable rise. By the 1990s, the country was experiencing rapid industrialization, and its integration into the global economy had begun to accelerate. A key moment in this process came in 2001, when China officially joined the World Trade Organization, WTO. This was a watershed moment, as it signaled China's full participation in the global trading system and marked the country's emergence as a major economic power. Joining the WTO meant that China agreed to adhere to international trade rules, open its markets to foreign companies, and implement economic policies that aligned more closely with global standards. This move transformed China's relationship with the world. It also led to a massive influx of foreign investment, which helped fuel China's industrialization. Foreign companies saw China as an increasingly attractive destination for manufacturing due to its large labor force, low production costs, and improving infrastructure. China's manufacturing sector quickly became the backbone of the global supply chain. The results of this economic opening were profound. Over the next few decades, China became the world's factory, producing everything from textiles and electronics to toys and machinery. The country's exports boomed, and China became one of the world's largest economies, contributing significantly to global economic growth. The country's rapid industrialization brought millions of people out of poverty, transforming China into the second largest economy in the world by the 2010s, only behind the United States. The economic growth also led to significant urbanization. Cities such as Shanghai, Shenzhen, and Beijing rapidly expanded, becoming global centers of commerce and culture. Millions of people moved from rural areas to urban centers in search of better opportunities, creating a vast and dynamic middle class. This urbanization sparked the rise of a new consumer economy in China. With rising incomes and changing consumption patterns, China became a crucial market for international companies, and its growing middle class became an important driver of global consumption. However, China's economic rise was not without its challenges. The rapid growth also came with significant social and environmental costs. Urbanization put immense pressure on infrastructure and the environment. Air pollution, water scarcity, and environmental degradation became pressing issues as China's cities expanded and industrial output surged. Despite the growing economic strength, wealth inequality also became a major concern. While many Chinese citizens enjoyed rising living standards, others, particularly in rural areas, were left behind as economic development concentrated in coastal cities. Another issue that surfaced with China's rise was the question of political reform. While the economic transformation had led to greater openness in many areas, China's political system remained firmly under the control of the Communist Party. The Tiananmen Square protests of 1989 had made it clear that many Chinese citizens desired greater political freedom, but the government's response had been harsh, and political dissent continued to be suppressed. The leadership under Deng Xiaoping and his successors, such as Jiang Zemin, Hu Jintao and Xi Jinping maintained strict control over political life while allowing economic reforms to continue. China's rise also led to increased geopolitical tension. As the country grew stronger economically, it sought to assert its influence in global affairs. China's growing economic clout, combined with its large population and military power, made it an increasingly important player in international politics. However, its rapid rise also led to concerns among its neighbors and other global powers, particularly the United States, about China's ambitions and its role in the global order. In the 21st century, China has become a major force in global politics and economics. The country's Belt and Road Initiative, which aims to connect China with other regions through infrastructure projects, has expanded its influence across Asia, Africa, and Europe. The initiative reflects China's growing ambitions to reshape global trade routes and to assert its leadership in international affairs. Meanwhile, China's growing technological sector, with companies like Huawei, Alibaba, and Tencent, has made it a leader in innovation and a competitor to Silicon Valley. China's transformation from a closed agrarian society to a global economic powerhouse is one of the most remarkable stories of the past half-century. While the Communist Party has maintained its grip on power, the country has undergone profound economic, social, and technological changes. The economic reforms that began under Deng Xiaoping have turned China into a major player in the global economy, and its rise has reshaped the international balance of power. However, the challenges that come with China's rise are far from resolved. The country faces issues such as an aging population, the environmental impact of its industrialization, and the growing need for political reform to address the aspirations of its people. The question of how China will navigate its next phase of development remains open, and its future will have a profound impact on the global order in the coming decades. In 2012, Xi Jinping ascended to the leadership of the Communist Party of China, marking the beginning of a new era for the country. As the General Secretary of the Communist Party and the President of China, Xi has sought to consolidate power and assert China's influence both domestically and internationally. Under Xi's leadership, China has continued its economic rise while also navigating significant political, social, and international challenges. Xi Jinping's rise to power marked a shift in the leadership style of the Communist Party. Unlike his predecessors, who were seen as relatively pragmatic and focused on economic reform, Xi has emphasized a more centralized approach to governance, with a focus on strengthening the authority of the Communist Party. Xi's leadership has been characterized by his desire to reassert the party's control over every aspect of Chinese life, from the economy to the military to the media. One of the most significant moves Xi made upon assuming power was the launch of an ambitious anti-corruption campaign. The campaign, which began in 2012, targeted both high-ranking officials and lower-level party members who are accused of corruption. Xi's anti-corruption campaign has been one of the most far-reaching and high-profile in modern Chinese history. It has helped to solidify his popularity among the Chinese people, who have long been frustrated by the prevalence of corruption within the Communist Party. However, some critics argue that the campaign has also been used as a tool to eliminate political rivals and strengthen Xi's personal power. Xi has also sought to assert his ideological vision for China's future. In 2017, the Communist Party enshrined Xi Jinping thought on socialism with Chinese characteristics for a new era into the party constitution, elevating Xi's ideology to the level of Marxism-Leninism and Mao Zedong thought. This move was a clear indication of Xi's desire to consolidate his position as one of the most powerful leaders in Chinese history. By positioning his ideology as a guiding force for China's future, Xi has sought to cement his legacy and ensure the continuation of his policies long after his tenure. Under Xi, China has also seen a return to a more assertive foreign policy, As China's economic power has grown, so too has its influence on the world stage. Xi has emphasized the importance of China's national rejuvenation and has positioned China as a global leader, with a vision for reshaping the international order. One of the most prominent initiatives launched under Xi is the Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, which aims to connect China to countries across Asia, Africa, and Europe through infrastructure projects, trade agreements, and investments. The BRI reflects China's ambition to expand its influence and reshape global trade routes, positioning China as a key player in the 21st century. Xi's foreign policy has also been marked by a more confrontational approach to the United States and other Western powers. Under his leadership, China has increasingly asserted its territorial claims in the South China Sea, leading to tensions with countries in the region and with the United States. Xi has also pursued a more aggressive stance on issues such as trade, technology, and human rights. These actions have led to a deterioration in relations between China and many Western countries, particularly during the trade war with the United States, which began in 2018. Domestically, Xi has overseen a tightening of control over civil society, with greater restrictions on freedom of speech, the press, and political dissent. The Chinese government has increasingly turned to digital surveillance and censorship to maintain control over the flow of information. The government has also cracked down on activists, lawyers, and religious groups, further limiting space for opposition. Xi's administration has been particularly critical of the pro-democracy movement in Hong Kong, responding with a heavy-handed approach to protests and implementing a new national security law in 2020 that effectively undermined Hong Kong's autonomy. One of Xi's most controversial actions has been the treatment of China's Uyghur Muslim population in the Xinjiang region. Reports from human rights organizations and foreign governments have accused China of committing widespread human rights abuses against Uyghurs, including mass internment, forced labor, and surveillance. The Chinese government has denied these allegations, framing its actions as counter-terrorism measures aimed at curbing separatism and extremism. However, the situation in Xinjiang has drawn widespread international condemnation, with some countries labeling the actions as genocide. Despite these challenges, Xi has enjoyed significant support within China, largely due to the country's continued economic growth, the increasing standard of living, and the perception that China is becoming a more powerful and influential global force. Xi's administration has presided over a period of rapid technological advancement, with China becoming a global leader in areas such as artificial intelligence, telecommunications, and renewable energy. Chinese companies like Huawei, Tencent, and Alibaba have expanded their reach globally, making China a key player in the digital economy. Xi's leadership has also seen a growing emphasis on national pride and Chinese identity. His administration has sought to promote Chinese culture and values, positioning China as a unique civilization with a long and rich history. This emphasis on national pride has resonated with many Chinese citizens who view China's rise as a return to greatness after a century of humiliation at the hands of foreign powers. As Xi continues to consolidate power, questions about the future of China's political system remain. In 2018, the Chinese government removed term limits for the presidency, effectively allowing Xi to remain in power indefinitely. This move has led to concerns about the concentration of power and the potential for authoritarian rule to intensify. Critics argue that Xi's leadership is moving China further away from the political reforms that were introduced under Deng Xiaoping and closer to a system of personalized rule reminiscent of Mao Zedong's era. Despite these concerns, Xi's policies have had a profound impact on China's trajectory, positioning the country as a dominant force in global politics, economics, and technology. The coming years will determine how Xi's leadership continues to shape China, and whether the country can balance its growing global influence with the demands of political reform and domestic stability. In the 21st century, China has emerged as a global leader in technological innovation, driven by its rapid industrialization, state-led investment in research and development, and a growing, increasingly educated workforce. The country that once lagged behind the West in terms of technological development is now a key player in global technology, reshaping industries from telecommunications and manufacturing to artificial intelligence, AI, and space exploration. A pivotal factor in China's rise as a technology powerhouse is its government's focus on innovation as a key component of economic development. The Chinese government has consistently prioritized technological advancements, viewing them not only as a way to boost economic growth, but also as a means to assert national power and compete with the world's technological giants. In 2006, the government launched the National Medium and Long-Term Program for Science and Technology Development, which set ambitious goals to make China a global leader in science and technology by 2020. Since then, China has made significant strides, especially in fields like artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and 5G telecommunications. One of China's most well-known technological achievements is the development of 5G networks. China has become a global leader in the deployment of 5G infrastructure, with companies like Huawei, ZTE, and China Mobile at the forefront of the development of next-generation telecommunications technology. Huawei in particular has emerged as one of the world's largest and most influential companies in the field of telecommunications, providing 5G equipment and infrastructure to countries around the world. However, Huawei's rise has not been without controversy. The United States and several of its allies have expressed concerns about the company's ties to the Chinese government, leading to a global debate over security risks and the potential for Chinese espionage through 5G technology. Despite these concerns, China continues to push forward with its 5G ambitions, aiming to expand its influence in the global telecommunications market. Beyond 5G, China has also made significant advances in artificial intelligence (AI). The country has invested heavily in AI research and development, aiming to become the world leader in the field by 2030. Chinese companies like Baidu, Alibaba, and Tencent are leading the charge in AI innovation, with applications ranging from facial recognition technology to autonomous vehicles. China's success in AI is partly due to its vast population, which provides a rich data pool for machine learning algorithms. The Chinese government has supported AI research through policy initiatives and funding, positioning the country as a major force in shaping the future of AI technologies. China's success in space exploration is another testament to its technological advancements. The country's space program, under the leadership of the China National Space Administration (CNSA), has achieved a number of remarkable milestones in recent years. In 2003, China became the third country to independently send humans into space, joining the ranks of the United States and Russia. Since then, China has continued to expand its space ambitions, with plans to establish a permanent space station by the mid-2020s. In 2021, China successfully landed a rover on Mars, becoming the second country to do so after the United States. These achievements are part of China's broader strategy to enhance its technological capabilities and showcase its growing global influence. China's technological rise has also been marked by its dominance in manufacturing and innovation, in industries such as electric vehicles, EVs, and renewable energy. China is the world's largest producer of electric vehicles, driven by both government support and the growing demand for cleaner alternatives to traditional gasoline-powered cars. The Chinese government has offered subsidies and incentives to EV manufacturers, making the country a global leader in the electric vehicle market. Companies like BYD and NIO have become household names in China, while also expanding their reach internationally. The country's strong push for green energy, has also led to a boom in the renewable energy sector, with China being the largest producer of solar panels and wind turbines in the world. Despite these impressive achievements, China's technological rise has not come without its challenges. Intellectual property theft, lack of transparency, and concerns over cybersecurity are some of the criticisms China has faced as it ascends in the tech world. There is also the issue of government control and censorship, particularly when it comes to the internet. The Chinese government has a strict system of online censorship, known as the Great Firewall, which blocks access to foreign websites and social media platforms. While the Chinese internet has thrived with homegrown platforms like WeChat, Baidu, and TikTok, the country's restrictive approach to the free flow of information has been criticized by those who see it as a limitation on innovation and free expression. Another challenge to China's technological future is the increasing competition from other nations, particularly the United States, as the US has recognized China's growing influence in technology. It has sought to limit China's access to critical technologies, particularly in areas like semiconductors and advanced manufacturing. In 2020, the US imposed trade restrictions on Chinese technology companies, including Huawei, citing national security concerns. These moves have led to a technological decoupling between China and the West, forcing China to accelerate its efforts to become self-reliant in areas such as semiconductors and operating systems. As China continues to build its technological capabilities, it faces a delicate balancing act between fostering innovation and maintaining strict political control. The Communist Party has embraced technology as a tool for economic and social development, but it also sees technology as a way to maintain its authority. In areas such as AI and surveillance, China has developed cutting-edge technologies that are used to monitor and control its population. Facial recognition software, for example, has become a common tool for tracking citizens, and the government has used digital platforms to exert greater control over its people's behavior. The political implications of these technological advancements raise important questions about privacy, civil liberties, and the future of freedom in China. Despite these challenges, China's technological rise is undeniable. The country is now a global leader in several key areas of technology, and is positioning itself to play a central role in shaping the future of the digital economy. The next few decades will likely see China continue to push forward with its technological ambitions, striving to assert its dominance in the global technological landscape, while managing the complex political and social implications that come with it. As China's economy has grown and its technological capabilities have advanced, the country's global influence has also expanded. Under the leadership of Xi Jinping, China has become more assertive in its foreign policy, seeking to reshape the international order and enhance its global standing. This new era of diplomacy reflects China's ambition to play a leading role in the world, both economically and politically. One of the key initiatives that underscores China's growing global influence is the Belt and Road Initiative, BRI. Launched in 2013 by Xi Jinping, the BRI is a massive infrastructure and investment project that aims to connect China to countries across Asia, Europe, Africa, and beyond. The initiative seeks to build new trade routes, develop infrastructure, and foster economic cooperation among participating countries. Through the BRI, China has invested in roads, railways, ports, and energy projects, facilitating trade and economic growth in regions that have been historically underserved. The BRI reflects China's desire to project its influence across the globe, using economic diplomacy as a tool to strengthen its position on the world stage. The BRI has received both praise and criticism. Supporters argue that it provides much-needed infrastructure to developing countries, helping them to grow economically and connect more effectively to global markets. Critics, however, have raised concerns about the debt burden that the BRI places on participating countries, as many of them take on substantial loans from Chinese banks. There are also fears that the BRI could be used as a tool for China to increase its political and strategic influence, particularly in regions that are vital for global trade and security. In addition to the Belt and Road Initiative, China's growing military capabilities have further solidified its position as a global power. Over the past 2 decades, China has dramatically increased its defense spending and modernized its military. The People's Liberation Army, PLA, has become one of the most powerful militaries in the world, with advanced technologies in areas such as cyber warfare, missile defense, and naval power. China's expanding military presence, particularly in the South China Sea, has raised concerns among neighboring countries in the United States. China's territorial claims in the South China Sea, where it has built military installations on artificial islands, have been a source of ongoing tension with countries like Vietnam, the Philippines, and Malaysia, as well as with the US, which maintains a strong presence in the region. China's military expansion is closely linked to its broader vision of national rejuvenation, a concept that Xi Jinping has emphasized throughout his leadership. National rejuvenation, according to Xi, is about restoring China to its rightful place as a global leader, both economically and strategically. This vision has been used to justify China's growing assertiveness in international affairs as the country seeks to reassert its influence in areas that were historically under the sway of Western powers. In this sense, China's foreign policy has been deeply intertwined with its desire for greater autonomy and leadership in shaping the global order. At the same time, China's relationship with the United States has become one of the defining geopolitical issues of the 21st century. The two countries are the world's largest economies, and their relationship is characterized by both cooperation and competition. The US and China are deeply intertwined in global trade, investment, and supply chains, but they also have significant differences over trade policies, intellectual property rights, and geopolitical interests. The trade war that began in 2018, under the administration of US President Donald Trump, highlighted the growing tensions between the two powers. The US accused China of unfair trade practices, intellectual property theft, and market manipulation, while China viewed the tariffs and sanctions as an attempt to stifle its rise. Despite the trade war, both countries have recognized the importance of cooperation in areas such as climate change, global health, and nuclear non-proliferation. However, competition between the US and China continues to shape international relations, with both nations vying for dominance in areas such as technology, trade, and military power. The rivalry between the two countries is expected to be one of the defining features of global geopolitics in the coming decades. China has also sought to strengthen its relationships with other global powers, including Russia, the European Union, and developing nations. China's relationship with Russia has deepened in recent years, with the two countries strengthening economic, military, and diplomatic ties. The partnership between China and Russia is partly driven by mutual opposition to US, global influence, and a shared desire to challenge the Western-dominated international order. China's engagement with the European Union has been characterized by both cooperation and competition, particularly over trade, investment, and human rights issues. Meanwhile, China's increasing presence in Africa and Latin America has made it a key player in the developing world, where it has invested heavily in infrastructure projects and sought to strengthen political and economic ties. China's growing global influence has also raised concerns about its approach to human rights, democracy, and political freedoms. The Chinese government has faced widespread criticism for its treatment of ethnic minorities, particularly the Uyghurs in Xinjiang, and its repression of pro-democracy movements in Hong Kong. The Chinese government's crackdown on dissent, its control over information, and its growing surveillance state have drawn the ire of human rights organizations and Western governments. The tension between China's domestic political system and its global ambitions has become a point of contention in international relations. China's rise as a global power is reshaping the international order, and its influence is likely to continue growing in the coming years. While the country faces significant challenges, including political repression, environmental degradation, and growing competition with the West, its economic and technological progress has positioned it as a key player in shaping the future of the world. China's vision for its role on the global stage is clear. It aims to be a leader in shaping global governance, economic systems, and technological advancements. Whether it can balance its domestic political system with its global aspirations will be a defining question in the coming decades. In the year since Xi Jinping assumed power, he has articulated a vision for China's future that is both ambitious and far-reaching. Central to his leadership has been the concept of the Chinese dream, a term that encapsulates Xi's vision for the rejuvenation of the Chinese nation. The idea is that China will not only become a global leader in economic terms, but also reclaim its historic status as a dominant power in the world, with a strong and stable government, a thriving economy, and an influential presence on the global stage. Xi's Chinese dream builds upon the long-held aspirations of Chinese leaders to restore China's place as a global superpower, a vision that stretches back to the days of the Qing dynasty and earlier. In Xi's rhetoric, the Chinese dream is about more than just economic prosperity. It is about national pride, social stability, and a renewed sense of cultural identity. Xi has positioned himself as the leader who will guide China to this great rejuvenation, a process that is both political and cultural, aimed at overcoming the century of humiliation that began with the Opium Wars in the 19th century. At the heart of Xi's vision is the belief that China must be strong, economically, politically, and militarily, if it is to achieve the goals of national rejuvenation. He has emphasized the importance of maintaining the authority of the Communist Party, insisting that the party is the only force capable of guiding China to its full potential. This focus on party unity and control has led to a tightening of political freedoms within China, as Xi's leadership has sought to prevent any challenges to the party's dominance. One of the most significant aspects of Xi's vision is the continued expansion of China's global influence. The Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, remains one of the central components of the Chinese dream, as it seeks to connect China to other parts of the world through trade, infrastructure, and investment. Xi's government views the BRI as a key tool for not only enhancing China's economic power, but also cementing its political and strategic influence around the world. The BRI aims to create a vast network of trade routes, including land and sea corridors, connecting China to Asia, Africa, and Europe. By strengthening economic ties with other countries, Xi's government believes that China can reshape global trade routes and increase its soft power. In addition to economic and geopolitical ambitions, Xi has made cultural rejuvenation a central pillar of the Chinese dream. His leadership has been marked by a strong emphasis on promoting Chinese culture and values. The government has made significant investments in cultural initiatives, including the promotion of Chinese language, history, and traditions, both at home and abroad. The idea of national rejuvenation is deeply tied to the idea of the Chinese Renaissance, with Xi positioning China as a unique civilization, with a long and glorious history that is now poised to reassert itself on the world stage. A key aspect of Xi's leadership has been his emphasis on control, both domestically and in the international arena. Domestically, this has meant increased surveillance, censorship, and repression of dissent. The government has strengthened its control over information, using digital surveillance tools to monitor citizens' activities and suppress any challenges to the state. The government has also cracked down on pro-democracy movements, particularly in Hong Kong, where the imposition of a national security law in 2020 effectively ended the city's relative autonomy. The crackdown in Hong Kong was seen as a significant blow to the one country, two systems framework that had been promised when the city was handed back from British to Chinese rule in 1997. Xi's consolidation of power within the Communist Party is another central feature of the Chinese dream. In 2018, term limits for the Chinese presidency were removed, allowing Xi to potentially remain in power indefinitely. This move was seen as a significant shift in China's political landscape, as it concentrated power in Xi's hands and eliminated any formal checks on his authority. Xi has increasingly positioned himself as the core leader of the party, and his ideological influence has been enshrined in the party's constitution, alongside the legacies of Mao Zedong and Deng Xiaoping. While Xi's vision for China has been embraced by many within the Communist Party, it has also faced criticism. Some argue that his focus on centralized power and control has stifled political reform and contributed to rising authoritarianism. The Chinese dream, while appealing in its promise of national rejuvenation, has also been marked by increasing political repression and a crackdown on freedoms, which many view as incompatible with the values of a modern, open society. Xi's vision for China also includes the assertion of China's military power. As China's economic clout has grown, so too has its military capabilities. Under Xi's leadership, China has modernized its military, strengthening its naval and air forces and expanding its presence in regions such as the South China Sea. The Chinese military has become increasingly assertive in its territorial claims, and Xi has emphasized the need for China to maintain a strong defense capability in an increasingly complex international environment. The growing military assertiveness has led to tensions with neighboring countries in the United States, as China's actions in the South China Sea, Taiwan, and the East China Sea have raised concerns about its long-term ambitions. Xi's leadership is also marked by a growing sense of nationalism within China. National pride has been a key theme throughout his time in office, with the government emphasizing the importance of Chinese sovereignty, territorial integrity, and cultural heritage. This nationalism has resonated with many Chinese citizens, particularly as the country's global power continues to rise. However, this emphasis on nationalism has also led to a more aggressive foreign policy, with China asserting its interests more forcefully on the world stage. The Chinese dream, as articulated by Xi Jinping, represents both a continuation and a transformation of China's historical aspirations. While the country has undergone tremendous changes in recent decades, the core idea of national rejuvenation remains central to its leadership. Xi's vision for China's future is focused on strengthening the Communist Party, enhancing China's global influence, and promoting Chinese culture and values. Whether this vision can be realized without political liberalization, and whether it will lead to greater tensions with the international community, remains to be seen. As China's economy has rapidly grown, the country has faced a range of complex domestic challenges that threaten to undermine its continued progress. While the economic reforms of the past few decades have led to substantial gains, these successes have come with significant social, economic, and environmental costs. The Communist Party's ability to maintain stability while navigating these challenges will be key to China's future. One of China's most pressing challenges is the issue of inequality. Although China has lifted millions of people out of poverty, the wealth gap between the urban and rural populations has widened significantly. China's coastal cities like Beijing, Shanghai, and Shenzhen have prospered from the country's economic boom, becoming global financial and technological hubs. However, the countryside has lagged behind, with many rural areas still facing poverty, lack of access to quality healthcare and education, and limited economic opportunities. While urbanization has been a key driver of China's economic success, the rapid migration from rural to urban areas has also created tensions and strain on resources. The government's ability to address the disparities between urban and rural areas is crucial for maintaining social cohesion and ensuring equitable growth. Another major challenge is China's aging population. The one-child policy, implemented in 1979 to control population growth, has left China with a demographic imbalance, with a large proportion of the population now entering old age. This has resulted in a shrinking workforce, putting pressure on the country's pension system, healthcare, and social services. As the population ages, China will face difficulties in maintaining the economic growth rates it has enjoyed in recent decades. The Chinese government has already begun to adjust its policies to address this issue, including relaxing the one-child policy and promoting family-friendly policies. However, the long-term impact of the policy on China's demographic structure is undeniable. In addition to demographic challenges, China is grappling with environmental degradation. Rapid industrialization and urbanization have led to severe pollution in many parts of the country, particularly in cities like Beijing, where smog and poor air quality have become chronic issues. China is the world's largest emitter of carbon dioxide, and while the country has made strides in adopting renewable energy and reducing emissions, the environmental toll of its industrial boom remains significant. Water scarcity is also a growing concern, as pollution and overuse of water resources have strained the country's water supply. The government has made efforts to address these issues, investing in green technologies and renewable energy. But environmental degradation remains a major challenge to China's sustainable development. Social stability is another key challenge for China. While the Communist Party has maintained tight control over political life, the increasing demand for greater freedom of expression, human rights, and democratic reforms has led to growing dissatisfaction among certain segments of the population. The Chinese government has been particularly sensitive to dissent, cracking down on pro-democracy movements, human rights activists, and ethnic minorities like the Uyghurs. The repression of freedoms, such as freedom of speech, religion, and assembly, has led to international criticism and strained China's relations with Western countries. Internally, the government must balance the desire for social control with the growing demands for more political participation and individual rights. China's rising middle class presents both opportunities and challenges. The country's burgeoning middle class has driven much of the country's economic growth, with increasing consumer demand for goods, services, and entertainment. However, this growing middle class also presents a challenge for the government, as people with higher incomes and greater access to information may demand more transparency, political participation, and rights. The middle class's growing expectations could test the Communist Party's ability to maintain control, as people increasingly seek a voice in the direction of the country's future. China's political system remains a key area of concern. The Communist Party has maintained its monopoly on power, but there is growing tension between the need for economic modernization and political liberalization. While China's economy has become increasingly open to global markets, its political system has remained tightly controlled. The Chinese government's response to events like the Tiananmen Square protests and its recent crackdown on pro-democracy movements in Hong Kong have raised questions about whether China's political system can adapt to the demands of its increasingly educated and connected population. As China continues to modernize, the question of whether the country can find a balance between economic progress and political reform remains unresolved. The government's efforts to maintain control while addressing these challenges are reflected in its policy initiatives. President Xi Jinping's vision for a Chinese dream emphasizes national pride, economic strength, and social stability. While this vision has been successful in uniting the country around a common goal, it has also raised concerns about the concentration of power and the stifling of political freedoms. Xi's moves to consolidate his authority, including the removal of term limits for the presidency, have led some to question whether China is moving toward a more authoritarian future. Despite these challenges, the Chinese government has managed to maintain stability and continue its trajectory of growth. The country's focus on economic development, technological innovation, and national pride has resonated with many Chinese citizens, and the Communist Party's ability to deliver prosperity has helped maintain its legitimacy. However, the future of China's political system and the country's ability to address its domestic challenges will determine whether its rise as a global power can be sustained. As China's power and influence have grown over the past few decades, its relationship with the rest of the world has become increasingly complex. While the country has made tremendous strides economically and technologically, its global ambitions have been met with both cooperation and resistance from other nations. China's rise is reshaping international relations, challenging existing power structures, and presenting both opportunities and challenges for the global community. One of the most significant aspects of China's rise is its growing influence in global trade and economics. As the world's second-largest economy, China has become a central player in global markets. Its manufacturing capacity, vast consumer market, and investment in infrastructure have made it a crucial partner for many countries. China is a key trading partner for nations in Europe, Asia, and Africa, and its Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, has expanded its economic reach even further. The BRI, which seeks to develop infrastructure projects across Asia, Africa, and Europe, is designed to create new trade routes, enhance connectivity, and foster economic cooperation. The BI reflects China's desire to reshape the global economic order and increase its soft power. By investing in infrastructure projects in developing countries, China seeks to strengthen its influence in these regions, providing financial support and gaining access to new markets. However, the BRI has faced criticism, particularly from Western countries, who view it as a way for China to expand its political and strategic influence under the guise of economic development. The initiative has raised concerns about the debt burden that it places on participating countries, as well as the potential for China to exert undue influence over their domestic affairs. In addition to its economic influence, China's military and geopolitical ambitions have been a growing source of tension on the global stage. China's increasing military capabilities, particularly in the South China Sea, have raised concerns among its neighbors in the United States. The South China Sea is a key shipping route, and China's territorial claims over large parts of the area have been contested by several countries, including the Philippines, Vietnam, and Malaysia. The US and its allies have expressed concerns about China's militarization of the region, with the construction of military bases on artificial islands and its assertive stance in territorial disputes. China's military expansion is not limited to the South China Sea. The country has also made strides in modernizing its naval forces and strengthening its military presence in other parts of the world. China's growing military power, coupled with its more assertive foreign policy, has led to increasing tensions with the US, particularly in the Asia-Pacific region. The competition between China and the US for dominance in areas such as trade, technology, and military power is one of the defining features of contemporary geopolitics. The issue of Taiwan is another source of tension in China's relationship with the world. Taiwan, which China views as a part of its territory, has long been a flashpoint in Sino-American relations. While the US recognizes the One China policy, it maintains informal relations with Taiwan and provides the island with arms for self-defense. China has repeatedly warned against foreign interference in Taiwan's affairs, and its growing military presence in the region has raised concerns that Beijing could use force to achieve reunification. The status of Taiwan remains one of the most sensitive and complex issues in China's foreign policy. China's growing global presence has also led to increasing competition with other major powers, particularly the US. The trade war between China and the US that began in 2018 is a reflection of this competition. The US accused China of engaging in unfair trade practices, including intellectual property theft, forced technology transfers, and state subsidies for Chinese companies. China, in turn, argued that the US was trying to contain its rise and undermine its economic development. While the trade war has resulted in tariffs and economic disruption, it has also underscored the broader geopolitical rivalry between the two countries. In addition to its rivalry with the US, China has been expanding its relationships with other global powers, particularly Russia. The China-Russia partnership has deepened in recent years, with both countries seeking to counterbalance Western influence and challenge the existing international order. The two nations have cooperated on issues such as energy, military security, and diplomatic initiatives, with a shared interest in promoting a multipolar world. However, the China-Russia relationship is complex, and there are underlying tensions, particularly as China's growing economic power gives it more leverage in the partnership. China's engagement with the global community has also been shaped by its approach to international institutions. As China's power has increased, it has sought a greater role in organizations such as the United Nations, the World Trade Organization (WTO), and the World Bank. China has also sought to create alternative institutions, such as the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank (AIIB), which provides funding for infrastructure projects in Asia and beyond. Through these institutions, China aims to enhance its global influence and provide an alternative to Western-dominated financial systems. While China's rise presents many opportunities for global cooperation, it also raises important questions about the future of international relations. China's approach to global governance, particularly in terms of its increasing assertiveness and growing influence in international institutions, has led to concerns about its commitment to international norms and values. The country's human rights record, particularly in regions such as Xinjiang and Hong Kong, has drawn criticism from Western governments and human rights organizations. The Chinese government has faced accusations of suppressing freedoms and committing human rights abuses, leading to tensions with countries that prioritize democracy and individual rights. China's relationship with the world is thus characterized by both cooperation and competition. As the country continues to rise as a global power, it must navigate the complexities of international diplomacy, balancing its economic ambitions with the need to address global challenges such as climate change, security, and human rights. The next few decades will likely determine China's role in the global order, and whether it can emerge as a responsible global leader, or if its growing power will provoke further tensions and divisions. In the 21st century, China's technological rise has become one of the most defining features of the nation's growth. From becoming the world's manufacturing powerhouse to positioning itself as a leader in emerging technologies, China's focus on innovation and technological advancement is shaping not only its economy, but its influence on the global stage. The government has placed a strong emphasis on technology as a pillar of the Chinese dream, aiming to make China a global leader in areas like artificial intelligence, AI, 5G, quantum computing, and renewable energy. One of the most ambitious areas in which China has sought to gain global leadership is in artificial intelligence. Over the past few years, China has poured billions of dollars into AI research, aiming to become the global leader in this field by 2030. The Chinese government has identified AI as a critical technology for national security, economic development, and global competitiveness. AI is being deployed across a range of sectors, from facial recognition technology and autonomous vehicles to healthcare and education. Companies like Baidu, Alibaba, and Tencent are at the forefront of AI development, while Chinese startups are developing cutting-edge innovations in machine learning and deep learning. The rapid progress in AI has been fueled by China's access to vast amounts of data. With a population of over 1.4 billion, China has an unprecedented pool of data that can be used to train AI algorithms. In addition, the Chinese government has made it clear that it sees data as a key resource to drive the future of AI development. China's focus on AI has not only transformed its domestic industries, but has also given the country significant leverage in global technology discussions. However, concerns have arisen about privacy, surveillance, and human rights abuses, as China has deployed AI technologies for mass surveillance and social control. The Chinese government's extensive use of facial recognition, especially in monitoring its population, has drawn international criticism. Another area in which China has emerged as a global leader is 5G technology. The country's push for 5G infrastructure has made it a central player in the global telecommunications industry. Chinese telecom giants like Huawei and ZTE are leading the charge in 5G innovation, offering next-generation mobile networks that promise faster speeds, greater connectivity, and the potential to revolutionize industries such as healthcare, automotive, and manufacturing. However, Huawei's dominance in 5G has sparked controversy, particularly in the United States and its allies, who have raised concerns about security risks posed by Chinese technology companies. The US has taken steps to limit Huawei's influence, citing national security risks, and other countries have followed suit, while China continues to expand its 5G networks both domestically and internationally. Quantum computing is another frontier where China is aiming to take a leadership role. Quantum computing, which leverages the principles of quantum mechanics to process information exponentially faster than traditional computers, has the potential to revolutionize industries ranging from cryptography to drug development. China has invested heavily in quantum research and development, and in 2020, Chinese scientists achieved a significant breakthrough in quantum computing by achieving quantum supremacy, the ability to solve problems that are impossible for classical computers. With its growing investments in quantum technologies, China is positioning itself to lead the next wave of technological innovation. Renewable energy is yet another area where China is emerging as a global leader. The country has become the world's largest producer of solar panels and wind turbines, and is the largest market for electric vehicles, EVs. The Chinese government has made significant investments in green technologies as part of its long-term economic strategy. As part of its commitment to addressing climate change, China has pledged to become carbon neutral by 2060 and to reach peak carbon emissions before 2030. The rapid growth of China's renewable energy sector is not only a response to domestic environmental challenges, but also a means of securing China's leadership in the global green economy. Despite China's impressive technological advancements, the country faces significant challenges in this arena. One of the biggest hurdles is its reliance on foreign technologies, particularly in areas like semiconductor manufacturing. While China has made significant strides in areas like AI and telecommunications, it remains heavily dependent on imports of advanced semiconductor chips, which are essential for everything from smartphones to artificial intelligence. This reliance has made China vulnerable to geopolitical tensions, particularly in the face of trade wars and restrictions imposed by countries like the United States. In recent years, the US and other Western nations have raised concerns about China's technological rise, particularly in the areas of cybersecurity, intellectual property theft, and industrial espionage. The US has targeted Chinese companies like Huawei with sanctions, accusing them of stealing intellectual property and engaging in activities that threaten national security. These tensions have led to a technological decoupling between China and the West, with China striving for greater technological independence and the US seeking to limit China's access to key technologies. China's rise as a technological superpower also raises questions about its political system. While China has made significant advances in technology and innovation, The country's authoritarian political system remains a source of concern. The Chinese government has used technology to tighten its grip on power, with the widespread use of surveillance tools and AI-powered social control mechanisms. The country's social credit system, which monitors citizens' behavior and rewards or punishes them based on their actions, is one example of how China is using technology for political control. These developments have raised questions about the balance between innovation and individual freedoms, as China's technological advancements often come at the cost of privacy and civil liberties. China's technological future will depend on its ability to address these challenges, while continuing to innovate and lead in emerging fields. The country's continued focus on technological development is likely to play a central role in shaping the global balance of power in the coming decades. As China seeks to achieve its goal of becoming a global technological leader, its ability to navigate the complex geopolitical and domestic challenges it faces will determine the trajectory of its rise and its influence on the world stage. At the heart of China's rapid economic rise and its growing influence on the world stage stands the Chinese Communist Party (CCP). Since its founding in 1921, the CCP has been the central pillar of Chinese political life, and its power remains absolute. Under the leadership of Xi Jinping, the party has reinforced its grip on power and sought to strengthen its legitimacy by positioning itself as the guiding force behind China's transformation. As China continues to evolve, the CCP's ability to maintain control while adapting to a changing global and domestic landscape will be critical to the country's future. The Communist Party's leadership has been crucial to China's success in modernizing its economy and consolidating its political power. The CCP played a central role in ending foreign imperialism, defeating warlords, and unifying China under the banner of socialism. The party's authority has been rooted in its ability to maintain social stability, promote national unity, and drive economic development. In return, the CCP has earned the loyalty of many Chinese citizens, who see it as the force that has transformed China from a poverty-stricken nation into a global powerhouse. Under Xi Jinping, the CCP has taken significant steps to reinforce its authority and eliminate any potential challenges to its dominance. Xi has introduced a series of reforms that have centralized power within the party, making it more hierarchical and less tolerant of dissent. His leadership has been marked by a stronger focus on ideological purity, with a renewed emphasis on Marxism-Leninism and the importance of the party in shaping Chinese society. Xi's vision of the Chinese dream has become a central tenet of the party's rhetoric, positioning the CCP as the force that will guide China to national rejuvenation and global leadership. A key part of Xi's strategy has been the expansion of the party's control over all aspects of Chinese life. The CCP has increased its presence in the economy, the military, education, the media, and the legal system. The party has also extended its influence into private businesses, ensuring that no sector of society remains outside its reach. In many ways, the CCP's role as the central authority in China is more pronounced than ever, with the party's policies influencing nearly every aspect of the country's development. One of the most significant changes under Xi Jinping has been the consolidation of power within the party. Xi has positioned himself as the core leader of the CCP, elevating his status within the party hierarchy and centralizing decision-making in his hands. In 2018, the Chinese government removed term limits for the presidency, allowing Xi to potentially remain in power indefinitely. This move was seen as an indication of Xi's desire to strengthen his position and ensure that his vision for China would continue long after his tenure. By consolidating power, Xi has diminished the influence of other factions within the party, further ensuring that the CCP remains a unified force. The party's control over Chinese society is also reflected in its approach to the media and information. The CCP has implemented an extensive system of censorship, blocking access to foreign websites and controlling domestic news outlets. The party exercises tight control over what information is disseminated to the public, ensuring that its narrative dominates the media landscape. Social media platforms, which have become essential to public discourse around the world, are heavily monitored and regulated in China. The government has developed sophisticated tools for online surveillance, tracking citizens' activities and cracking down on dissent. This tight control over information has allowed the CCP to maintain its legitimacy by preventing the spread of information that could challenge its authority. The CCP's approach to governance has been built on maintaining social stability and avoiding the challenges of political pluralism. The party has worked hard to eliminate any potential sources of opposition, whether from political dissidents, civil society organizations, or ethnic minorities. In recent years, the government has taken a particularly hard stance on the pro-democracy movement in Hong Kong, where large-scale protests in 2019 and 2020 were met with a heavy-handed response. The imposition of the national security law in Hong Kong in 2020 was seen as a clear effort by the CCP to eliminate any political challenges to its rule, undermining the city's autonomy and freedoms that had been promised when Hong Kong was handed back to China from British rule in 1997. The CCP's approach to ethnic minorities has also been controversial. The treatment of Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang has drawn widespread international condemnation. Reports of mass detention, forced labour and cultural suppression have raised concerns about human rights abuses. The Chinese government has denied these allegations, framing its actions as necessary measures to combat extremism and maintain national security. However, these policies have strained China's relations with several Western nations and have raised important questions about the party's commitment to human rights. Despite the criticism, the CCP's grip on power remains strong. The party's legitimacy is largely derived from its ability to deliver economic growth, improve living standards, and maintain social stability. The Chinese people, particularly in urban areas, have benefited from the economic transformation that the CCP has overseen, and many view the party as the force that has lifted China out of poverty and put it on the path to global leadership. For many citizens, the Communist Party represents a necessary stabilizing force in a rapidly changing world. However, the CCP's continued control faces significant challenges. The country's growing middle class, along with its increasingly connected and educated population, is demanding greater political participation and transparency. As China becomes more integrated into the global economy, questions about political freedoms, human rights, and the balance between economic progress and political control are likely to continue to emerge. The future of the CCP will depend on its ability to navigate these challenges while maintaining the stability and legitimacy that have been central to its rule. As China continues its rise as a global power, it faces an array of challenges both at home and abroad. While its economic success has brought unprecedented growth and influence, the road ahead is filled with uncertainties. China's political, economic, and military ambitions are reshaping the global order, but these ambitions are not without significant risks. Navigating these challenges will be crucial for China as it seeks to maintain its stability and continue its ascent on the world stage. One of the most pressing challenges for China is its relationship with the United States. The US-China rivalry, which has escalated in recent years, has become a central feature of global geopolitics. The trade war that began in 2018 between the two countries revealed the deep economic and ideological divides between them. The US has accused China of unfair trade practices, intellectual property theft, and currency manipulation, while China has accused the US of trying to suppress its rise. The trade war led to tariffs and economic disruptions, but it also highlighted the broader competition for global leadership in areas such as technology, trade, and military power. The technological rivalry between the US and China is perhaps one of the most significant aspects of their competition. As China has emerged as a leader in fields such as 5G, artificial intelligence, and quantum computing, it has become a serious competitor to the US in the global technological arena. The US has sought to limit China's access to critical technologies, particularly through sanctions on Chinese companies like Huawei and restrictions on semiconductor exports. This technological decoupling is a key aspect of the broader US-China rivalry, and it has implications for global supply chains and innovation. The geopolitical tensions between the US and China are not limited to trade and technology. One of the most contentious issues in their relationship is Taiwan. China views Taiwan as an integral part of its territory, and the issue of Taiwan's sovereignty remains a central element of Chinese foreign policy. The US maintains unofficial relations with Taiwan and supports its right to self-defense, but it has been cautious not to provoke China over the issue. As China's military capabilities continue to grow, the potential for conflict over Taiwan remains a significant concern, particularly as China becomes more assertive in its regional ambitions. In addition to the US-China rivalry, China faces growing tensions with other countries in the Asia-Pacific region. Its territorial claims in the South China Sea, where it has built military installations on artificial islands, have led to disputes with countries like the Philippines, Vietnam, and Malaysia. The South China Sea is a crucial shipping route, and China's aggressive stance in the region has raised concerns about freedom of navigation and the security of international trade routes. While China has sought to assert its territorial claims through diplomacy and military presence, it faces resistance from neighbouring countries and from the international community, which has challenged China's claims through legal rulings and diplomatic efforts. China's relationship with India, its neighbour to the west, has also been fraught with tension. The two countries have a long history of territorial disputes, particularly over the region of Kashmir. In recent years, border skirmishes and military standoffs have escalated, particularly in the disputed region of Ladakh. Both countries have nuclear weapons, which adds a layer of complexity to their rivalry. While China and India have cooperated on some issues, such as trade and climate change, their ongoing border disputes and strategic competition have made their relationship one of the most significant geopolitical challenges in Asia. Internally, China faces challenges that could impact its stability. One of the most pressing issues is its aging population. The one-child policy, which was in effect from 1979 to 2015, has led to a demographic imbalance, with a large proportion of China's population now entering old age. This poses significant challenges for the country's pension system, healthcare infrastructure, and workforce. The Chinese government has made efforts to address these issues by relaxing the one-child policy and implementing family-friendly policies, but the long-term effects of the policy on the country's demographic structure are still being felt. China's political system also faces challenges as the country continues to modernize. The Communist Party has maintained tight control over the political system, but there is growing demand for greater political participation and transparency. The country's rising middle class, which is becoming more educated and connected, is increasingly seeking more political freedoms and rights. While the government has responded by tightening its grip on power and limiting dissent, the growing demands for political reform present a significant challenge. The Chinese government's approach to governance, which combines economic liberalization with political control, will be tested as the country faces greater pressure for reform. Environmental challenges also loom large for China. While the country has made significant investments in renewable energy and green technologies, The environmental toll of its rapid industrialization remains significant. Air pollution, water scarcity, and climate change are all pressing issues that China must address. The country is the world's largest emitter of carbon dioxide, and its efforts to reduce emissions and promote sustainable development are critical not only for China's future, but for global efforts to combat climate change. Balancing economic growth with environmental sustainability will be one of China's most difficult challenges in the coming decades. Finally, China's future will be shaped by its ability to balance its domestic ambitions with its international role. As China continues to assert itself as a global power, it must navigate the complexities of international diplomacy, trade, and security. At the same time, it must address its internal challenges, including economic inequality, demographic shifts, political reform, and environmental degradation. The way China manages these competing demands will determine whether it can maintain its growth and stability, or whether it will face setbacks in its quest for global leadership. As China moves further into the 21st century, it stands at a crossroads. The country's rapid economic growth, technological advancements, and expanding global influence have positioned it as one of the world's most powerful nations. Yet with this power comes a set of complex challenges that will shape China's future trajectory. The decisions made in the coming decades will determine whether China can maintain its rise and become a model for the world, or whether it will face significant setbacks in its quest for global leadership. One of the key questions for China's future is whether it can balance its economic success with the need for political and social reform. While the Chinese Communist Party, CCP, has successfully transformed the country into a global economic powerhouse, it has done so while maintaining tight control over political life. The CCP has focused on maintaining stability, but the demands for greater political freedoms, individual rights, and transparency are growing among China's increasingly educated and connected population. The country's rising middle class, which has benefited from economic growth, is also beginning to demand more political participation and representation. The challenge for the CCP will be to navigate these demands without losing its grip on power. In recent years, President Xi Jinping has reinforced the power of the Communist Party, consolidating his authority and placing himself at the center of China's political and ideological framework. Xi's Chinese dream has become the guiding principle for the nation, emphasizing national rejuvenation, economic prosperity, and political stability. However, Xi's leadership has also been marked by a tightening of political control, including a crackdown on dissent and increased surveillance. As China's middle class grows and its citizens become more vocal in their demands for greater freedoms, the CCP will need to find a way to balance the desire for reform with the need for control. The path China takes on this issue will have significant implications for its future political stability and international standing. Another challenge that looms over China's future is its demographic shift. The country's one-child policy, which was implemented in 1979 to control population growth, has led to a rapidly aging population. As the number of elderly citizens increases, China faces mounting pressure on its healthcare and pension systems. The shrinking workforce presents a significant challenge for the economy, as there may not be enough young workers to support the elderly and drive economic growth. The Chinese government has already made efforts to address this issue by relaxing the one-child policy and promoting family-friendly policies, but the long-term impact of the policy will be felt for generations to come. Additionally, as the population ages, China will need to find ways to improve its social safety net and care systems to support its elderly citizens. Economically, China must contend with the challenge of maintaining high growth rates while transitioning from an investment-driven model to one that's more sustainable and consumer-driven. The country's economy has become highly dependent on exports, and many of the growth drivers of the past, such as cheap labor and low-cost manufacturing, are starting to fade. The Chinese government is pushing for a shift towards innovation and consumption-led growth, encouraging domestic demand and technological advancement. However, achieving this transition will not be easy. It will require significant structural reforms, including greater emphasis on services, entrepreneurship, and a move away from heavy industry. China must also confront the growing wealth inequality between urban and rural areas, which could hinder social stability if left unaddressed. Environmental sustainability is another major challenge for China. As the world's largest emitter of greenhouse gases, China has a crucial role to play in addressing climate change. The country has already made significant strides in renewable energy, investing heavily in wind and solar power, and it has become a global leader in the production of electric vehicles. However, China's rapid industrialization has come at a significant environmental cost, with air pollution, water contamination, and deforestation affecting the quality of life for millions of people. The country's commitment to becoming carbon neutral by 2060 is an ambitious goal, but achieving this target will require comprehensive policies and continued investments in clean energy and green technologies. China's future is also inextricably linked to its role in the global community. As the world's second-largest economy, China has an increasing stake in global governance, trade, and security. The country has sought to expand its influence through initiatives like the Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, which aims to build infrastructure and create new trade routes across Asia, Africa, and Europe. Through the BRI and other initiatives, China has sought to reshape the global economic order and increase its soft power. However, this expansion has not been without criticism, particularly from Western countries, who see China's growing influence as a challenge to the existing international system. How China manages its relationships with the United States, the European Union, and its neighbors in Asia will be crucial for the country's future stability. In the long term, China's ability to lead the world will depend not just on its economic and military power, but also on its ability to balance innovation with social harmony, economic growth with environmental sustainability, and political control, with the demands of an increasingly sophisticated populace. As China seeks to realize its vision of national rejuvenation, it must confront both internal and external challenges that will test its resilience and ability to adapt. The decisions made in the next few decades will shape the trajectory of not only China, but the global order as a whole. While China's future is uncertain, one thing is clear. The country's rise has already transformed the world in profound ways. Whether it can navigate the challenges ahead and fulfill its ambitions of becoming a global leader will depend on its ability to balance change with stability, innovation with tradition, and power with responsibility. As we look back over the course of China's remarkable journey from imperial decline to becoming a global superpower, we see a nation that has undergone profound transformation. From the turmoil of the 20th century, marked by revolution, war, and upheaval, China has emerged as an economic powerhouse, a technological leader, and a key player in global geopolitics. The nation's story is one of resilience, ambition, and the pursuit of national rejuvenation. Under the leadership of figures like Mao Zedong, Deng Xiaoping, and Xi Jinping, China has navigated the complex terrain of modernization and political control. Mao's legacy, while marred by the excesses of the Cultural Revolution and the Great Leap Forward, laid the foundation for the rise of China as a socialist power. Deng's pragmatic economic reforms initiated China's opening to the world, setting the stage for decades of rapid growth, and Xi Jinping's leadership has emphasized a more assertive role for China on the global stage, as the country strives to reclaim its place as a central force in world history. China's rise, however, has not been without its challenges. The country faces significant domestic issues, including an aging population, economic inequality, environmental degradation, and demands for political reform. Externally, China's growing influence has sparked tensions with the United States, neighboring countries, and other global powers. The delicate balance between economic growth and social stability, between political control and the demands for greater freedoms, will shape the trajectory of China's future. The Chinese dream, as articulated by Xi Jinping, represents a vision of national rejuvenation, a dream of restoring China to its rightful place as a global leader. This vision is deeply rooted in China's history, drawing upon centuries of cultural pride and aspirations of sovereignty. But as China steps into the future, it will have to navigate the complexities of its domestic challenges and the shifting dynamics of the global order. The future of China will be shaped by its ability to adapt to new realities, both at home and abroad. The world is increasingly interconnected, and China's rise has been both the result of and a contributor to the changing global landscape. The country's economic power, technological advancements, and growing geopolitical influence make it a formidable force. However, China must also contend with the risks that accompany its rapid rise. Whether it is the pressure to balance growth with environmental sustainability, the challenges of political reform in a rapidly modernizing society, or its evolving role in global governance. The way China addresses these challenges in the coming decades will have profound implications not just for its own future, but for the entire world. As China continues to grow and assert itself, the international community will have to adapt to a new global order where China is at the center. The potential for cooperation between China and the rest of the world is vast, but so are the risks of conflict and competition. Ultimately, the story of China is far from over. The nation's future is still unfolding, and the choices it makes today will shape the world for generations to come. As China moves forward, the world will watch closely to see whether the Chinese dream becomes a reality, or whether it faces the obstacles of its past. Whatever the outcome, the legacy of China's rise will be a defining feature of the 21st century. As we come to the end of our exploration of China's history, it is clear that the country's journey is one of remarkable transformation. From its imperial past through the chaos of revolution and war to its emergence as a global superpower, China's story is one of resilience, ambition, and profound change. It is a nation that has faced tremendous challenges and has, time and again, risen to meet them with remarkable strength and determination. The China we see today is a reflection of the past, shaped by centuries of history, but it is also a nation in the midst of reinvention. The economic reforms of the late 20th century have propelled China into the 21st century as an economic powerhouse, while its political leadership under Xi Jinping has placed the nation on a path toward greater global influence. With technological advancements and a growing middle class, China has positioned itself as a central player in the world's future. Yet, as we've seen throughout this journey, China's path forward is not without its obstacles. The nation must confront the complexities of political reform, the challenges of demographic change, environmental sustainability, and the demands for greater freedoms and social equity. How China manages these challenges will determine its ability to maintain the stability and growth that have defined its modern rise. The world's relationship with China is evolving just as rapidly. As the country continues to grow in economic and political stature, it will inevitably shape the global order in profound ways. Whether through its Belt and Road Initiative, its expanding technological footprint, or its growing military assertiveness, China is at the center of a changing world. But the path it chooses, both domestically and internationally, will have far-reaching consequences for global peace, prosperity, and cooperation. China's story, however, is not just one of a single nation. It is part of the broader narrative of the 21st century, where global dynamics are shifting and new challenges require cooperation and understanding. The future of China, with all of its possibilities and risks, is intertwined with the future of the world. As we conclude this reflection on China's rise, its challenges and its potential future, it is important to recognize that history is still being written. The choices made today will shape the course of tomorrow, not just for China, but for all of us. The journey of China is far from over, and the next chapter will be just as crucial as the one that came before it. Thank you for joining us on this exploration of one of the most fascinating and transformative nations in modern history. As China continues to navigate its path, the world will continue to watch, and in many ways be shaped by, the forces driving its evolution.